Alright, so for our return to doing stuff in person, you had suggested doing another list video, which we didn't know exactly what we were going to do. Like, you had mentioned doing, like, comedies or something like that. But then this one came to mind, and this is kind of something that I kind of always wanted to do. I just wasn't quite sure how. Like, I knew I wanted to do something related to villains because they're, more often than not, my favorite character in a movie. And then there's the whole thing where it's like, both growing up and now, even though I love, like, a wide array of, like, kinds of movies, I kind of always end up finding myself coming back to movies that just have a hero and a villain, and that's pretty much what it is at its core, more or less. So these are the kind of the characters that I've always been drawn to. I don't know about you, if you felt kind of the same way. I would assume so, since this one was your idea.
Yeah.
So we were going to do 10, but then I got to about 12 or so, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to narrow this down. Like, it's going to be tough to narrow it down to 15. I had a list of, like, 60, and wasn't sure how to narrow it down. So that's what we're doing, the usual thing where we have, like, an honorable mention and then a 15. Like, we did our top 15 favorite movies a while back. Or a couple of years ago, whatever it was. So, when I did this, like I said, I don't know about you, we don't know anything about what each other said. But there's a lot of stuff missing that I kind of wasn't expecting to be missing, because it had to be narrowed down so much, and because there's so many goddamn villains in the movie universe. So, and you also wanted to bring up about doing the thing where if there's one villain that, like, spans over multiple movies or has had multiple people play them, just say the villain itself rather than just the specific movie.
I break that rule once on my list.
I wasn't trying to I have one that, like, spans multiple movies, but we'll get there. And as far as, like, there's so many that are iconic to the point that we kind of also didn't want to make it boring. Like, you had a whole criteria going on. Do you want to go through that?
Yeah, so when I picked mine, and keep in mind, these aren't necessarily the best villains in movies. They're just personal favorites, the ones that keep us coming back. But what I measured on was based on just a simple set of criteria. Motivation and justification, the means to carry out whatever they're trying to do, the threat level that they are to the people around them, their charm, whether it's true charm or whether they're able to put on a face, what their scheme is, the level of fear that you should have in them, how close they get to success, and then I think one of the most important measurements of a hero or a villain is the relationship to their enemy.
Yeah. And I was basically on the same page as you as far as, like, it's basically, once again, the same thing we talked about when we talked about our favorite movies, where it's I took the objective approach and the just my personal favorites approach, and it's kind of a combination of the two. So it was putting them in an order was, like, the hardest part, because that's just yeah. But so yeah, obviously there's going to be only narrowed down to 15. There's going to be a lot of stuff that isn't here because we also wanted to be a bit inspired. Like I said, going by your criteria, also that opens up a whole lot of doors. And it'd be really boring to say, like, just the really obvious ones.
Yeah, I mean, we could have easily just regurgitated the AFI list and called it a day, but it's more fun when you get to talk about maybe villains that don't get talked about that much. Now, there are some that are iconic on here.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's fun to talk about something different. You know, when you click on a video that has a list, you want to hear about stuff that you don't hear about all the time.
You would think. Some people are weird.
Like, I'm sure many people have clicked on a list, and the end just feels so anticlimactic that it's like, well, that was a letdown. Like, I was hoping for something different. It's always... Do you ever notice that it's always kind of a rush that whenever you click on a video and watch a list, and the one that you swear is going to be number one comes in at, like, number 4 or 3? Doesn't it give you, like, some excitement? Like, oh, we're going to get something different.
But
I don't get too excited when they're number 2, though, because then usually number 1 is a cop-out. But if they're, like, 4 or 3, I get excited.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I like there are some where we're probably going to match AFI in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for the most part, I didn't. It's not even like intentionally trying to stray away. It's just you kind of make your own thing, and then that's what happens. And like we were saying, there's so many villains in the movie universe. There may be stuff that occurs to us like long after this, and it's like, oh yeah, I didn't even consider that person. But if we made it that far and didn't think of them, then maybe they aren't one of our top 15, so it doesn't really matter.
It's the same thing we said about the movies.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come to mind, it's probably not a favorite.
Yeah. So, just to cover all bases real quickly, I'm sure this will be time-stamped in one way or another, if you just want to get right to it. But, to cover all bases, I did just want to read the AFI list real quick, because they have it split up, because obviously the AFI does top 100s, but the thing is, it's heroes and villains, so it's 50 heroes and 50 villains.
Mm-hmm. Which maybe some point in time we'll do a heroes video.
Yeah, that one might be a lot harder, but it would be interesting. And once again, these may be people that we're not going to necessarily like talk in depth about the AFI list. I'm just going to read through it just to establish, yes, we know some of these people exist that seem like they might totally should be here, but they're not. That are still worthy of praise anyway. So from 50 to 1 on the AFI list, we have Alonzo Harris, an inclusion that I love. Auric Goldfinger, Kaiser Soze, Paul Mooney's Scarface, Hans Gruber, Jack Nicholson's Joker, Baby Jane Hudson, Betty Davis and Little Foxes. They doubled up on her in a row for some reason. Tom Powers, who is Cagney in The Public Enemy. Joan Crawford from Mommy Dearest, which is amazing. Freddy Krueger, Cruella de Vil, the animated one. Edward G. Robinson in Little Caesar. Harry Lime, that's Orson Welles in The Third Man, not Pesci in Home Alone. Frank Booth, J.J. Hunsaker, who is Burt Lancaster in Suits and All Success. Olivier, Marathon Man. Bela Lugosi's Dracula. Bonnie and Clyde, which I thought was an interesting inclusion. Mrs. Danvers, Travis Bickle. Reverend Harry Powell, who is somebody I really wanted that I might not have gone with. Then, once again, Robert Mitchum's second time in a row, his Max Cady, as opposed to De Niro's, which is interesting. The Martians from War of the Worlds. Cody Jarrett, who is Cagney in White Heat. Jack Torrance, Gordon Gekko, Eve and All About Eve. The Terminator from the first movie, obviously. Angela Lansbury in The Manchurian Candidate. This one's always been interesting to me. The Hunter in Bambi. It's like, yeah, I can see that. Captain Bligh, that's Charles Lawton's incarnation from Beauty and the Bounty. The Shark in Jaws, Annie Wilkes, Noah Cross, Finds and Schindler's List, of course, is a popular one. The Alien in Alien, HAL 9000, Alex DeLarge, Michael Corleone from Godfather 2, the Evil Queen in Snow White, Reagan as possessed by Pazuzu in The Exorcist, Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity, who's very high. I mean, it's a very inspired choice, but it's also very high. Alex Forrest, Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. Nurse Ratched, The Wicked Witch of the West. Vader, Norman Bates, and Hannibal. So some of them may show up, some of them may not. We're very well aware of these people's existence if they don't show up, and we love... Like, I don't object to any of those, do you?
Not the ones that I know of.
And then I might go through a quick list at the end of the ones that I really considered, because there's a shitload of those. But I guess we can go ahead and get into this then. And like I said, we're going to do the honorable mention and then the 15. So do you want to start?
I can. For my honorable mention, I hope you don't exit out of the video thinking like this is a goddamn joke.
Once again, we are not aware of our each other's lists at all.
But my honorable mention is Ed Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I think what's interesting about Ed Rooney is that what he's doing is, it's very interesting because from an outside perspective, depending on how you look at it, he could just be doing what any educator should be doing, but for him, you can tell it's personal, and the means get kind of personal. I mean, how many principals do you know that you skip school and they show up at your house? The other thing that I love about Rooney too is for what he's doing, his comeuppance is very exaggerated, which adds to the comedy. Um,
his comeuppances are layered.
and I just love that Rooney has he sounds very evil when he talks, like because he's so grouchy the entire movie that he does come across intimidating. Or he could. He's not to us anymore because we've seen his comeuppance and seen everything that's happened to him. But I just think he's a very slight villain. He's a villain as compared to what the main character is trying to accomplish. But at the same time, like he's not. Other than trying to break in the house, he's not really doing anything wrong. He's just being kind of creepy and overzealous and taking things personally.
Yeah, very, very serious.
But if you look at it based on my criteria, like his motivation is personal. His means are very, probably not what they should be. His threat level is very small. He's a school principal. He does threaten to hold Ferris back a year. That's about as threatening as he gets. For his charm, he's not the most charming guy in the world, especially in the way he talks to Grace.
Yeah.
His scheme, he doesn't really have a scheme. He's just kind of trying to nail Ferris Bueller.
It's a clear objective, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Fear, there's not really a fear factor there. He's not dangerous, he's just creepy. For his closeness to success, he's right there at the finish line. Before Jeannie has a change of heart.
That's it's the only time we see Ferris practically shitting his pants.
Yeah. And then relationship to enemy, obviously he makes it very personal. I'm not going to break down every category for every villain because we'll be here all night. But I mainly went through that list because I wanted to justify Rooney's inclusion because, like I said, I didn't want people to think I didn't take this seriously because I mentioned Ed Rooney as a top. But like I said, not a top, a favorite.
Well, the more you describe Rooney, the funnier I find this because he has a lot in common with my honorable mention.
Oh, boy.
But they're complete opposite characters.
Okay.
Because when I think Rooney, another thing I'm thinking of is the way that it's less like he's really, really trying to be professional, but his chaotic nature is eking out. We're seeing his chaotic nature where his professionalism comes in from time to time. One of my favorite shots in the whole movie is when he's running down the hallway and he stops and walks by the doors. So, speaking of people who are clear professionals and are all about what they do and take it very, very seriously and will do anything to do their job to completion, but it's much easier to see the chaos than the professionalism, especially as the movie goes on. My honorable mention is Vincent in Collateral.
Oh.
Tell me you don't kind of see the same thing a little bit.
He was on the cusp for me. He was right there.
Yeah. Yeah, for this, it was between Vincent in Collateral or John Fitzgerald in The Revenant. And because a lot of mine are much older, so I kind of went a little newer here at the beginning. But yeah, as far as Vincent and Collateral goes, it is for the start of it, like I said, that's more of the climax, but at the beginning it is, and towards the middle, it is the whole thing of he's so almost creepily professional about everything he's doing and what he's carrying out and how much he sees that as just this ultimate, this must go through to the end regardless, and he maintains that the only time, of all the things that happen in his job, it's when Max gets in the way is when he starts to lose his shit. Because even when they're talking to Barry Shabaka Henley, and he shoots him point blank in the head 3 times, and he never changes his expression. And then there's the whole thing of the "Yo homie, is that my briefcase" scene is apparently shown in gun classes and how that scene is handled and how he withdraws and the way he fires off is taught in classes. And then a lot of people don't like the climax of Collateral, or I guess it's more so critics, Didn't like the climax of the Collateral because it went a little too routine thriller. Because he became like a full-on antagonist after we'd seen him like his philosophical side and his like where we kind of get glimpses of inside, like when he sees the wolf across the street and he like kind of sees himself. Here comes the cat jingling through if you hear that. But then by the end, he's just completely like you could say he's off the leash because it's going full thriller at that point, but he still seems kind of completely in control.
I would compare it, and it's kind of a funny comparison, but it's kind of like at the end of The Great Mouse Detective, where Ratigan is kept together the entire movie, and then when he's finally had enough and he can't stand no more, he shreds the suit and just comes down to his most primal version of himself. And I think anybody that deals in a business where they're killing people has the ability to have that happen at any time.
Those are much like Ed Rooney. That too is weirdly comparable.
Mm-hmm.
Like it makes perfect sense. Ratigan's somebody else I would have loved to have included.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many options. And yeah, and you know, just taking into account the chaos and the business are kind of starting to come into play all at once at the end there, where it's like Max crashes the cab, they completely flip over and they crash.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the first thing Vincent does? He climbs out and runs to Jada Pinkett Smith because that's the job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's all that matters. It's like, I'm not going to let this car wreck or any damage that's been done to me. Maybe that's where people think it might go off the rails a little bit, but I think it just adds to the character and the fact that he...
Here's a golf clap for Vincent and his fucking work ethic.
His last words are before getting shot are, "I do this for a living."
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, obviously that's also... I didn't make my top 15, but it's one of my favorite movies as well.
And I think also it tells a lot, too, with how he passes, where he's very calm. It's like he realizes that losing control is what cost him.
Yeah. There is like a self-disappointment when he's sitting there getting ready to die.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to scold himself.
Alright, so I guess we're on to the full-on numbers now.
Full 15.
Alright, who's your 15?
Don't close the video. It's going to get real serious here in a second. This is my last comedic villain. But number 15 is Shooter McGavin. Okay. Shooter McGavin is so close. There's a lot of good sports villains, especially in comedies. You know, between Shooter McGavin, I could have picked White Goodman from Dodgeball. It was a toss-up between Shooter McGavin and Ernie McCracken. But at the end, Shooter McGavin wins out because Shooter McGavin's motivation, if you go by my chart, Shooter McGavin's motivation is literally his sport is changing and he doesn't like it. He's the star of the show and it bothers him. So what does he do? He doesn't want his game to change. At his highest point of villainy, he has taken his rival's grandmother's house and talks about burning it to the ground and pissing on the ashes just because somebody might be a little better at his sport.
And that's not even to mention that he did, in fact, hire a guy to get in a car and run him down.
Yeah. And this was after there was a scene where Happy went too far and broke a beer bottle and he had to rein it in. It was like, no, on the golf course. Well, apparently it didn't stay on the golf course. But Shooter also, to me, is one of those characters that's just as strong as the lead. Like, whenever you leave the movie, he's not your typical generic sports villain. He's so quotable. He's so recognized. I would have to think that Shooter McGavin is what Christopher McDonald gets the most.
Surely.
I would have to think so. Because he is. He's iconic as a comedy sports villain. He's cream of the crop. He's written well. Chris McDonald delivers it perfectly. As a character, his motivation is very simple. His means are very... They gradually go out of control. It's fun to have somebody that gradually goes to more desperate means. Ed Rooney is another example of that. He started by just going to the arcades and going to places that he thought the cool teens hung out. And then all of a sudden we cut and he's in front of Ferris's house. funny. Like, the escalation is funny.
It's so interesting how much comedy villains can be pushed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like, and that's a common theme. I mean, just some things that come to mind. Steve Martin in The Man with Two Brains was pushed all he could go.
I was gonna say, and it actually opens it up even more because comedies are already made to be exaggerated.
And
So-
like Brad Jones pointed out, Charles Grodin is a master of the comedy guy that just gets pushed too far and goes insane. Charles Grodin made it an art form. Chevy Chase is up there too. Clark Griswold, when he gets pushed, things go nuts.
Yeah.
He's not a villain. Grodin's not a villain in Beethoven, or I guess you wouldn't consider him a villain in Clifford or something like that. But like for Shooter McGavin, he is a villain. He is out to undermine and get rid of the antagonist or the protagonist.
So is that your 15?
That's number 15, Shooter. Like I said, last comedic villain.
Okay, my 15 is a little more on the serious side. My number 15 is Hans Beckert. Peter Lorre and M. He's a child murderer. If you like hit on the timestamp and you see me laughing at this, it's because this is the transition from the last one we talked about. And the interesting thing about Hans Beckert is that he's barely in his movie. Like, he's barely in M at all. The movie's like an hour 50. But the first time we see him, we already know that there's a child killer on the loose, and we see a reward poster on it. And there's a girl here playing with a ball. And then we see the very recognizable shadow of Peter Lorre whistling in the Hall of the Mountain King as he stalks down the streets. And we see his shadow against his own wanted poster, essentially, even though nobody knows what he looks like. And it's these really chilling opening scenes where they don't quite show his face. And so we see him, and we know the girl has a ball, and he goes and he takes her and he buys her a balloon. And then they go on their way, and then her parents are like looking for her and her mom's calling out for her, and we see her empty plates at the dinner table. And then the only two shots we get to tell you what happened are the ball rolling away and the balloon he just bought her stuck in the power lines. And then she's just gone. And then he's the kind of guy where it's like he sends letters to the police saying, like, I'm not done yet and stuff like that. And when we finally get a look at him, he's like looking in the mirror and just like making weird faces at himself. And then the rest of the movie is like the manhunt for him between the police and because obviously he's taking and murdering children, which is crossing a line. So there's like a whole other side of the story where the criminal underworld is looking for him. And it's like this whole thing. And then it brings in a debate at the end where I don't think it's much of a debate, but it's been a debate for some time as far as people discussing the movie and essays on it and stuff like that. And it's the idea that when an angry mob finally tracks him down and corners him in a basement, he has a big speech about how he can't control himself. Like he was basically born evil, and there's nothing he can do about it. Like, to him, he basically has to kill children.
That's a debate that goes on to this day with mental health.
Yeah, and that's it's an interesting thing here because I towards the beginning of like our first like quarantine, I went down a YouTube rabbit hole for To Catch a Predator, and there is, and you see a lot of weird shit there as far as how the minds of these guys work, and a lot of it is the same. Whereas like they're obviously monsters on the inside, but maybe it's it's like a mental health thing. So you want to like understand it, but then when you see the contrast between the two, where when they're like if you look at that show, or when you see Lori in this movie, when they're alone with the child, they are so calculating and confident and scary and in control. And then the second they're faced with consequences or an adult, they crumble immediately. And that's what the entire last 10 minutes of this movie is Lori's crumbling in front of this mob. And it's one of those cases where I feel like we don't even see his sentencing. We just see like the trial starting, and then the mothers are like grieving on the bench, and one of them says, "Whatever the verdict is, we're not getting our children back," and it just fades out. But it's the case of...
That's a bummer.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I love that it ends there because it's like, is there a fitting sentence?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's basically what it is it's not going to change anything. Like, you can do what you want to the dude, and hopefully he suffers for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the damage they do is unrepairable. So, irreparable, I guess is the word.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Lorre did a lot of stuff. Like, Peter Lorre was in comedies, he was in musicals.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also, like, a scary motherfucker, like, for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, like, kind of the quintessential role, I think, when you imagine him. You imagine the poster of the movie where he's been branded with the M, like the Scarlet Letter, and catches it in the window reflection.
I assume the M is for molester.
I think murderer.
Oh, okay.
But then again, it would make sense if it was, like, had a double meaning. So, yeah, that's my 15.
My 14, I told you I would start to get more serious. So we're going to go pretty dark with this one. For me, number 14 is Carter Hayes from Pacific Heights.
Nice.
Yeah. Anybody that's ever rented knows that there's that neighbor that's very creepy and keeps to themselves, and you kind of wonder what's going on behind the door. Well, Carter Hayes is the worst nightmare scenario of that situation. I think with looking at my scale, I think Carter Hayes is very high on the fear factor because it's very realistic that he could be living next to you.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of like Matthew Modine and Melanie Griffith, they were his landlord, which is a little bit different. But I think the fear is still there that you could have a neighbor like that. And the fact that he's so manipulative, and as you see through the movie goes, he would also rank high on my scale of false charm. He's good at putting on a face and getting what he wants and being very polite.
He always has a way of maneuvering to where the rules fall in his favor somehow.
Mm-hmm. But like a lot of great villains, at the end, what costs him is he loses his grip on that control. And he starts to lash out and wants to kill. When his plan is fucked with. And Michael Keaton plays it great. Michael Keaton has never gotten enough credit for how versatile he is as an actor.
I always think of that scene where she's in the garage and he's just sitting in his fucking car watching her.
Yeah, it's creepy. It's super creepy. And I think Carter Hayes is one of the villains. Like you brought up Max Cady earlier. Like Max Cady's a popular example. Carter Hayes is like the B-level version of that, but he's not really B-level. He just doesn't get talked about as much. And like I said, I have been a champion of Michael Keaton for years. I think the dude's got skills. I think he's very underappreciated in what he does. I love too because watching Spider-Man: Homecoming, that famous scene where him and Peter are talking in the car, Carter Hayes seeps through it, and it's amazing. But yeah, I think Carter Hayes is probably the most realistic villain on this list, which I think has to put him toward the top because, that could be anybody.
Yeah. And how ballsy is it to have a villain that's threatening, but the opening scene of the movie is him getting the shit beat out of him? Like, he's getting the comeuppance from doing this previously in the first scene of the movie.
Yeah. See, Carter Hayes is one of those examples where, like, when you told me to expand the list, this was kind of good because he missed the cut the first time, and I'm glad I could include him this time. So yeah, Carter Hayes, number 14.
And if you are... I'm probably going to do this as a versus this October, but if you are a fan of Pacific Heights, there's a movie that Peter Weir directed in the 70s called The Plumber, that's very similar in setup, and also kind of has that surreal vibe of, like, this nightmarish person that comes into your life that you just can't get rid of. And he's also, like, destructing the house. So I'll probably further elaborate on this later in the year. Speaking of further elaboration, my number 14 is somebody we've already talked about in great depth when we did our top 15 movies video. Okay. So just to reiterate real quick, my number 14 is Doyle Hargraves. Dwight Yoakam and Sling Blade. I don't know what I didn't say in our top 15 video. I had a bit of a Doyle rant, but yeah, just an absolute, complete, and total piece of shit. And much like we were talking about with Carter Hayes, it's always scary when they can be real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we were saying in that video about how we were lucky enough that we didn't quite grow up with a Doyle, but we knew kids that had one. And it's just the stories are terrifying. And then when you see Doyle, you have when I see Dwight Yoakam in Sling Blade, I get a feeling inside me that's a feeling I've gotten being in real life with people that make me really uncomfortable. Like that feeling comes to me as if Doyle is in the room with me, and I'm like part of their family. And I feel that every time, no matter how many times I watch the movie too, it never fades. Sometimes it might even get like worse sometimes. And like I said, the more you see, the more he's capable of. How Linda's literally trapped. It's like they're not even married, but she's still trapped because he knows the right people, and that's all it takes. He plays cards with J.D. Shellnut, chief of police, and that's all you need to do. Like I said, he drives drunk right in front of the cops, and he has free reign to do everything, and to the point that the whole point that the movie comes to, like the whole conclusion the movie comes to, is some people can only be dealt with one way. It's a scary thought, but that's what we come to, and by the time we get to that point in the movie, it's like there was no other way for Doyle to be taken care of. That's how terrifying he was, and at the core of it, all he is a drunk asshole, but that can be really, really dangerous, and really, really bad, and traumatizing for all involved. So, yes, fuck Doyle Hargraves, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, speaking of people that can only be dealt with one way, I think you'll have fun talking about this one. My number 13 is Simon Phoenix from Demolition Man.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, I would have loved to have included him.
The crazy factor is high with this one. Is he just gives absolutely zero fucks. And that's scary in its own way when you deal with somebody that just does not give a fuck about anything. As far as categories for me that he rated high in, definitely relationship to enemy.
Yep.
That's very high.
Send a maniac to catch a maniac is the whole
exactly,
deal.
Exactly. It might be the most personal relationship on my list, almost. His means, it's violence. He is happy when there's violence.
When he's...
Any scene that he's in the movie, if he's not committing violence, he's talking about the next time he gets to commit violence.
Yeah, because he's in... it's funny that he's playing a human in a sci-fi movie. He might as well be a literal killing machine.
Yeah. And he's that way before they program him to be that way.
How insane and kind of amazing, if you love villains being villainy, how insane of a reveal is it that the people that supposedly, the hostages that blew up at the beginning that got Spartan put in the prison were already dead.
Yeah. And then he's sitting there gloating about it.
It's almost even barely addressed, but it's like, that's the most evil thing he did in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And it's also great when people that start off as villains that start off as pawns get out of control, because you could technically say that Cocteau's the main villain of the movie, but
it's like the reverse of Bane from The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
He doesn't. It's not revealed that he's a puppet. He starts as a puppet and just, of course, being Simon Phoenix, he doesn't just cut the strings; he shoots them off. But yeah, and it's just fun to watch this character in a world that is so sterile.
I love the museum shootout scene.
Yeah, and he's got good one-liners. He's funny. The guy at the museum when he's like, "What's your boggle?" and he just looks at him like, "What the fuck?" But no, I just think, and he's a perfect counterpart to Stallone's John Spartan.
Yeah, can we talk about his appearance too? By the way,
yeah,
obviously he's got the blonde hair that really sticks out. In the opening scene, he's wearing Beetlejuice pants.
Yeah,
it's like, this is the most amazing villain I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's stylish.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the movie, he's wearing overalls.
Yeah.
Like he dresses like Dennis the Menace, but he packs more in a slingshot.
He even has the blonde hair. I wonder if there's something to that.
Yeah, it's like I just want to imagine John Spartan as Mr. Wilson. Like,
in some cases, Cocteau is.
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, he's chaos incarnate,
Yeah.
and that's when he's most happy. Plus, he has a really good death. I mean, he gets frozen to death and his head gets kicked off. There's points there.
Yeah, we've talked about that before as well. It's always fun when a villain is super villainy and then has a death to match it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's 13 for me.
All right. My number 13 is Bruno Anthony from Strangers on a Train. It's like we were talking about. I don't have any repeat directors.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to choose a Hitchcock villain. Because I could have gone easy and said Norman.
Mm-hmm.
I could have gone with my favorite Hitchcock movie and said Uncle Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
But Bruno's the one that's kind of always stuck out to me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's another one of those ones where he just feels... I mean, Norman and Uncle Charlie certainly feel real to their own extents. But the idea of... maybe it's like somebody like me that has such a social anxiety problem. It's like the idea of talking to a stranger and where that can go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's one of those cases where he's like through the whole movie, like even when we know what he's capable of, we still almost fall right back into his charm every time he's on screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every time he's like starting to, buddy around with Farley Granger's people and stuff like that and fall into his crowd. It's like it's never a case of how can they not see he's off his rocker, because that charm just pulls us back in as much as it does anybody else. There's even the actual scene where he's at the party and he's like, "Let me demonstrate strangling somebody." But then there's that whole thing where he sees the sister played by Hitchcock's daughter, that looks like his previous victim, Farley Granger's wife. And you can see the insanity in him, just in the way there's just things that trigger him, and you can see where suddenly the evil from behind the charm just happens to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the whole thing about feeling stalked, and how you're constantly feeling watched. And there's always that point where there's the point to take it from two opposite ends. There's the moment when he's stalking Farley Granger's wife at the beginning. And she's in line at that ride when they're at the fair, and she's kind of seen him around, and she's kind of keeps looking behind her, and there's nobody there, and then she just turns and he's in line behind her, but then she just kind of thinks nothing of it, oh, this guy that I've been seeing all night. All right, he looks charming enough. That doesn't bother me. But then on the opposite end of that, the Washington scenes, when Farley Granger's just kind of going around and Bruno's stalking him from the way we just see this small tiny silhouette of a figure just watching him from various places.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is, I believe, your favorite shot in the movie, the tennis match, where Farley Granger's playing tennis and all the heads in the crowd are turning to watch the ball, and Bruno's in the dead center just staring directly at him, and his is the only head that's not moving.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a shot that works really well in comedy, but it works even better in this setting.
yeah. And then there's we see the whole, like I said, it's one of those cases also where the more it goes on, the more the facade starts to fall.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's so meticulous all the time. There's the whole thing where it's hey, I killed your wife without you asking me to. Now you got to kill my father, or else I'm going to blackmail you. Because all the evidence points to you.
I'm sorry, I just had a really funny image pop in my head. I want someone to Photoshop him into the scene where people were watching Happy Gilmore's ball bounce off of things, and his head is just still straight out.
To bring it back.
Yeah.
And it's and I love that he's so meticulous. This is almost darkly comedic. I love that he's so meticulous. He drew a map of his father's house to his bedroom and taped the door key to it. That seems to be a common thread that we've been talking about so far, is the villains that have this one precise plan that must go exactly as made.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and the way, like, when he goes in, like, he actually goes into the house and then goes into the bedroom, and he's like, Mr. Anthony, I gotta warn you, your son has basically hired me to kill you, and he's really dangerous. And the lamp turns on, and it's fucking Bruno in the bed. It's like, I'm sorry, my father's not here. And another case where we get a great climax. That carousel climax is pretty insane, especially for a movie from like 1951. Some incredible effects. And he's not perfect. That's always makes it an interesting villain. Where he gets a whole conflict where he drops the lighter in the sewer or whatever. And it's like where you have those moments where it's like, I talked about this a lot in Psycho, when they suddenly switch protagonists and we're watching Norman clean up a murder scene for 10 minutes straight with no dialogue, and you find yourself like in this really morbid way, like, oh man, like, oh, is he gonna get away with it? And it's like, oh shit, do I want him to get away with it? And it's like Bruno's been the antagonist this whole movie, and you know the meticulousness of the plan, so when he drops the lighter, you're like, oh shit, is he gonna get it in time? You're like, wait, who the fuck's side am I on? And Hitchcock was just a master of that. And of course Robert Walker, kind of quite playing against type here in this really weirdly effective way. We, at the time, like way back when we first saw it, before this person was persona non grata, we always said that if they ever should remake Strangers on the Train, that Spacey would have been the perfect one. And now we're seeing just how true that was. So yeah, I think Bruno is my number 13.
My number 12, we're going to talk about another villain whose undoing is that they lose control. Number 12 for me is Frank Costello.
Yeah.
You can go with Colin Sullivan if you want, but Frank is the mastermind.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I had picked somebody from The Departed, it would have been Colin, but Frank makes a lot of sense.
And here's why. Here's why Frank wins out. Colin, of course, was made by Frank. Frank started on Colin at a very young age. Very, very young. As you call it, the under the wing shot that you like so much. You go to the other side where Billy Costigan, his is thrown together a lot more quickly, and he's just thrown in. Whose facade starts to unravel first?
Yeah.
Frank knew to build a perfect facade, to get what he needed out of it, he had to take his time. And through the whole movie, he's very calculating. I like to look at the contrast, for example, of the scene where he's talking to Billy, and he's eating the lobster, and there's just the bloody hand right there, and he's just talking with it, and moving around with it, and it's intimidating. Well, at the end of the movie, we have something similar where he's covered in blood that could be used as a way to intimidate. But he is so far gone that they use it to point out he's off his fucking rocker. like an hour and a half ago, it had Billy like pissing his pants, like, oh my god, I can't fuck with this guy, to all of a sudden going, this guy don't know what's going on anymore. Like, and it's crazy. Like, he just becomes so wrapped up in paranoia that it ultimately becomes his undoing, to the point where he turns the one guy against him that he spent so long making sure wouldn't go against him.
And the only person he trusted was like Billy.
Yeah, he put all of his eggs in the wrong basket. He put them directly in the wrong basket. But I just love the insanity factor. Like Frank's fear is high because you never know when he's going to snap.
Yeah. Like
he lashes out, but he's always real quick to rein it in too, until the end. But no, I just think the fact that he took the time to build that plan, and it was a good plan. It worked for him for years. Years.
We've talked before about, obviously there's no way to confirm this, but we've talked before about the idea of him taking people under his wing so young. And it's like after he's taken Colin in, there's that scene when they're in like a garage, and it's like just a bunch of kids working while he's monologuing. And after what we learn at the end, we used to ask, like, is one of those other kids Berrigan, do you think?
It makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder, like, how many, like, these people that he's taken all under, like, what all is happening because they branched off from him.
He's like a super evil version of Fagin. from Oliver Twist.
That's pretty much exactly what's going
Yeah,
on.
that's what it is. I'm pulling out all kinds of references you didn't expect. I did my homework on this one, man. But no, and I just think Frank's really cool. He's played by Jack Nicholson. Yes, that helps. That helps. But no, I think he's just a really enjoyable villain to watch. He's one that, could put you can get relaxed with him because he has that very soothing tone when he's got it under control, and then when he lashes out, like it snaps you back to reality that this guy is fucking crazy.
Yes, when I put it on my top movies video, I think we even talked about the fact that what's interesting about him and the fact that he's losing it, like when Bill even tells him, like, you're 70 years old, Frank, we should be talking about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, usually you would think, like, when somebody's aging in their position, it means they're losing their luster and they're losing their, like, drive and they need to step down because they're practically useless. Mm-hmm. Frank is getting worse and more dangerous the older he gets.
Yeah, it really is.
So, is that your take on Frank?
Yeah, I had something else I was going to say, but I can't remember what it was.
Did it have anything to do with the strap-on?
No, actually it didn't. It did not.
That falls under the umbrella of he's old and losing his mind. Yeah, he's an absolute sex fiend. That's God knows what kind of trouble that's gotten him into.
Yeah, and a cokehead.
Simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right, number 12 for me.
Mm-hmm.
My number 12 is Suzanne Stone, Nicole Kidman, and To Die For.
Okay.
She might be unassuming because she's, works at the school and her dream is to be on TV. And she's probably one of the most remorseless people on this list. Because she has that whole thing where you want to talk about characters that have a facade. What's great about this is her facade is already so unhinged. Everybody's calling her out immediately. Like, there is no secret that she's unhinged, but people have no choice but to go with it because you can't really prove anything. And she basically goes on that. And her obsession with being on TV, basically. And the way we get these little moments, this is probably my favorite Kidman performance. There's a lot of those, but there's just these moments in there that props to Gus Van Sant as well. But there are these moments where the way the movie puts in these little details also, where like she's talking to, like, the movie's told from the perspective of different people, but mainly her perspective, where she's interviewing herself is like the kind of wraparound here. And there are these moments where she's talking to the camera, and there's a moment where she like says something and then winks, and they make like a ding sound, like you would for somebody who was like made for TV, like somebody who was made to be a reporter or something. But even though they put that lighthearted ding sound in there, it looks more like a tick. Like the facade dropping for a split second before she catches it. Like the insanity was coming through, and you can see that through the whole thing. And then she spends a lot of the movie gaslighting Joaquin Phoenix into thinking Matt Dillon's bad, so that he will murder him. This is a kid that's in high school that has everything. He may be a loser, but still, when you're that young, you still have everything to lose. And we learned that Phoenix ends up getting like more than a life sentence for this, despite his young age. But she just completely remorselessly seduces him and puts all this stuff in his head just to get him to kill Matt Dillon. Supposedly the husband she loves so much. But even though his family, like Dana Day, sees through it immediately. His sister, Ileana Douglas especially. Like they say, as soon as she walked into the room, it was like she's basically an adult Regina George when we meet her. Only significantly more gone here. And that's the thing, is for a while she just seems super conceited and super full of herself and just obsessed with being a big personality on TV. But then it's like what this obsession leads to is kind of terrifying. And like the way that she's able to turn it on and off, like when she's in the car with Phoenix and she's like weeping and it's like, Matt Dillon beats me and stuff like that. Well, obviously he doesn't. And while she's right in the middle of weeping, Sweet Home Alabama comes on the radio. The tears vanish, the crying vanishes, and she shrieks, "Oh my God, I love this song!" And she jumps out of the car and starts dancing. when she was right in the middle of that. This situation is so bad, you need to murder somebody. And that's the way it is, that on and off throughout the whole thing. Her interactions with Wayne Knight are really good too, and really kind of show the conniving nature of her and the darkness of her.
Newman.
And so that's yeah, and the way she builds up the whole thing, like how she has that speech to Wayne Knight where she's like, the fact that the news is given and that's how people know what's going on. And the fact that she has this whole monologue where she says she doesn't see herself as a reporter, she sees herself as like a messenger. Like she's building up to be like an almost biblical thing. And she's absolutely fucking insane. And once again has one of the best comeuppances ever to match this. Yeah, that would be my number 12.
Right. So on to number 11. You're talking about facades. Let's talk about somebody that has no facade whatsoever. None at all. You would think would need one, but apparently does not, because no one's going to stop it anyway. My number 11 is Judge Doom from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
I think every kid that ever saw Roger Rabbit as a kid shit their pants at just the sight of Judge Doom.
There may have been a long period of time where I didn't even watch Roger Rabbit as a kid because of him.
Yeah. And what is his motivation? He wants to tear down a cartoon town to build a highway when he is himself a cartoon. I guess that facade is. Yeah. He has that facade where he's a person as a cartoon.
And there's a very important facade here, but I get what you mean on like the sort of the level that you're talking about.
As soon as you see Judge Doom, you're like, that's the bad guy. He doesn't have to say anything. And I love the little detail that whenever he's in a scene, even when he's indoors, his cape blows in the wind. Like, it's just a really fun little detail. But Judge Doom is super intimidating. Super, super intimidating. Which is so funny that Christopher Lloyd doesn't get enough credit for being intimidating in roles.
Yeah, he scared the absolute fuck out of me in Dennis the Menace. He still does, honestly.
Switchblade Sam?
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I just love that Judge Doom doesn't apologize for anything. He's psychotic and evil. He's psychotic and evil because he's a toon. But you think that this human that is that insane. And then you hear something funny, which is hilarious, but at the same time very disturbing, that he killed Eddie Valiant's brother by dropping a piano on his head. Like, it's such a cartoon way to go. But when you look at it and say this character is the one that did it, that's fucking demented.
And the voice.
Mm-hmm. Once we realize he's a toon.
It's like,
and his whole transformation into a toon.
It's like as soon as you just say Judge Doom's toon voice, so many people around the world want to run and hide.
Yeah. I also think it's really cool that we never see what he looks like as a toon. He stays in the Doctor Doom costume the entire time. The Judge Doom, what I say?
Doctor.
No. Judge Doom costume the entire time. Even when he meets his demise, and you look at it, the costume's laying there. Yeah. He never left the costume. He's got lackeys that do his work for him that he's unkind to, which is a general villain thing. And everybody in the town knows there's something wrong with him, but no one has the guts to do anything about it.
Because they're terrified.
Yeah. He even intimidates Eddie Valiant. Like, it's... And, like, his method of dispatching toons with his dip, like the scene with the shoe.
Yeah. I was waiting for the shoe to be brought up.
Like, it's crazy. Like, for a villain like that to be in a movie like that is very... It works, though. It's what makes Roger Rabbit so great. Yeah. Is that we can have a villain this dark in a movie where one of the main characters is a cartoon rabbit.
Yeah, because it's literally a noir movie.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens to have these animated characters jumping around.
Because I guarantee you could drop Judge Doom into any other like noir movies, he would be just as creepy.
Yeah.
Just as creepy. But yeah, that's my number 11's Judge Doom.
Nice. I like that we haven't matched yet.
Mm-mm.
And like all of yours are making me say like, oh, I should have said that. My number 11 is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Like just the concept of the movie alone is like, yeah, that's a pretty substantial villain. I just simply the thing in the thing.
Mm.
I mean, how can you get any scarier? The whole concept of you don't know what the villain is the whole time. You know what it's capable of and what it does to an extent, at least as far from what you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then and the gore factor in this movie obviously is legendary. Whether it be this is the one I couldn't remember. Have you seen this?
No.
Oof. There's a lot I want to keep you in the dark about then, but most people I imagine will know what I'm talking about when it's like there's the things in which we see the thing reveal itself while not revealing itself. It gets it's really weird. There's a scene in particular with a dog that's one of the most gruesome things I've ever seen. It makes me really uncomfortable to watch it. I almost can't. But that's a lot of the movie, though. Is the horror of it being able... Like I said, you don't even... You can't even explain what it is. It just... I mean, how much more can you... Yeah, it's like I was going to go into a whole bunch of details here, but if you haven't seen it yet... and I just did a video on it, like, last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that pretty much speaks for itself. The Thing and the Thing is quite a formidable foe, to say the least. So, are we on top 10s now?
Yeah. So top 10. So these are the favorites of the favorites. I told you when we put this list together that I tried to take one villain from each thing. Like, I try not to overload on a source for villains. So number 10 is my lone Disney villain on the list. Number 10 for me is Gaston from Beauty and the Beast.
I really thought about him.
Yes. And I think what makes Gaston so great is any other story, he's the hero. He is 100% the hero.
That's very interesting.
He's good looking, he's muscular, he's charismatic, the women love him. Any other story, he is the hero. But in this particular story, he is so jealous and envious and so one-tracked that it pushes him over the edge, where he is manipulative enough that normally that manipulative charm would be good to help him get his way, maybe on a quest to save somebody. In this instance, he uses it to take a whole town in as a mob and bum rush a castle to fight something that he knows what it looks like, but he doesn't know what it's capable of. And he's so vindictive and evil about it. And the whole time he's fighting, he gloats. Like, he's a really great don't judge a book by its cover villain. He might be a prime example of it. And it's all born out of the fact of essentially a crush. His entire evil motivation comes from a crush. He has Belle's dad imprisoned because she just won't agree to marry him, and it bothers him that much.
He's basically an Alex Forrest in his own right.
Yes, he could have any woman in that town. Even the women comment that Belle is nuts for not wanting him. And that drives his insanity. But he brings this charm, like his song that he sings in the bar, and just the way that he talks to people, and the way that the town, you can tell, looks up to him. He uses that to his full advantage.
And it's like he has another very important factor that we haven't really brought up yet.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the villain that you love to hate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the more Gaston's full of himself, the more you kind of love to watch him.
Yeah, you do. He's a character that in any other Disney movie, if he was the hero, he would be so boring. But as a villain, he is so interesting. Like, get Hans from Frozen out of here. Gaston is the prime choice meat cut of this kind of character. Like, this is exactly what you want out of this character. And it's awesome to watch him come unhinged as he's fighting the Beast, and it's
a hell of a climax.
It is. For a movie called Beauty and the Beast, and you think, oh, that sounds so great. The climax is A-class. A-class. There's a reason that movie was the first animated one nominated for Best Picture. And Beauty and the Beast is one of those movies that every time I watch it, it gets better.
Yeah.
It improves as it goes. Like, before, like 10 years ago, I would probably put Beauty and the Beast in a top 15, maybe, of Disney movies. It's solid top 5 for me now. It's so good, and Gaston is a big part of that.
What do you think about that shot right before he falls to his death, where we see the skulls in his eyes?
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And he's just like, he's a great Disney villain. I don't think I know a lot of people give Beauty and the Beast credit for the movie that it is, but I don't hear enough people give credit to Gaston himself. Ironically, he's so full of himself that I feel like he earns it. And he's the lone appearance you'll see of a Disney villain on this list. But I think I picked the best one.
I too only have one Disney villain, but they come later.
Okay.
My number 10
Mm-hmm.
is the one I was talking about, where I have one character that spans multiple movies.
Okay.
So I just said that character in general.
Okay.
But still, slashes are involved in their name.
Okay.
My number 10 is Senator / Chancellor / Emperor Palpatine.
Ah, you went Palpatine.
Yes.
Okay.
Because everybody thinks, Vader's the big bad villain and everything.
Mm-hmm.
He is absolutely having his strings pulled to the fullest
Mm-hmm.
by somebody. And I love how much it's weird. It's a cliche to hate the prequels, and it's cliche to love the prequels.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically the shaping they did with him, and how we see that all the way through the whole saga.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Say what you will about the prequels, but the prequels did an excellent job of developing Palpatine.
yeah, pretty much starting at that last shot of him in the Phantom Menace, or the funeral shot of him in the Phantom Menace, I guess I could say.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's clear a plan is forming,
Mm-hmm.
and then the way we see that go throughout the second one, and then he goes. Revenge of the Sith is basically his show,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be the opera scene or the scene when he's with Mace Windu.
The opera scene in Revenge of the Sith is so good.
Yeah, that's basically where he solidifies himself as an all-time villain.
Mm-hmm.
And something even to mention that my personal favorite Star Wars movie,
Mm-hmm.
controversially enough, is Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Where we get, all he does is sit in his little, throne chair or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's redundant, but, and that's what he did. We literally just see him as a puppet master, just making all of this happen in front of him with all these characters that have been so built up and so well-rounded.
Mm-hmm.
They're all just his own fucking chessboard.
And he loves to point that out.
Yeah.
He loves that he can point that out.
And like I said, just the development of him throughout. And normally I'm not one of the, those people that say, oh, we'll forget this existed. I usually say, oh, just fucking grow up and get over it. Canon is canon. Fuck off. I am leaving... I am leaving The Rise of Skywalker out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I love The Force Awakens, and I actually like The Last Jedi. The Rise of Skywalker is where I drew the line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much talking about Phantom Menace to Return of the Jedi and the development we've had here. The only thing he really does in Rise of Skywalker is make everybody wonder how the fuck he's here.
Mm-hmm. To the point where it's become a meme now.
Yeah, because he had the perfect send-off in Return of the Jedi. That moment where Vader throws him down the shaft was the best thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite scenes in my favorite Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why of all the things going on with the sequel trilogy, that Rise of Skywalker is the one that made me go, I'm not having this.
None of this.
When you brought do the flip flopping in The Last Jedi. Do what you're gonna do with Snoke. Do what you're gonna do to Luke or whatever. As aggravating as that was, the way it was on and off and flip flopping all the time. Palpatine is where I took it personally.
Mm-hmm.
When they brought Palpatine back in such a stupid way and tried to ruin. Return of the Jedi is never gonna not be great. The ending of Return of the Jedi is never going to not be great. But that they kind of soiled it a little bit by doing out The Rise of Skywalker, I took it personally.
You know how I know you really like Return of the Jedi? One of your least favorite cliches is the villain that turns good.
Exactly. And the reason a villain turning good works for me in that is because the villain is Palpatine. And Vader was always going to come back around. Vader started good. Vader was going to end good. It was full circle. Palpatine was the villain the whole time. So
Vader brought balance to the Force, just like they said he would.
yeah. So there you have it. And with the Star Wars fan base out there, I don't think I need to say much else because I'm sure everything's been said. So yeah.
Okay. Number 9. Number 9 for me. Don't click off the video. I want to talk about this.
Oh god, you're saying that in the top 10 now. This should get interesting.
Number 9 for me is Biff Tannen.
Yeah.
But I am strictly restricting it to Biff Tannen in Back to the Future 2.
Okay.
Because Back to the Future 3, he's Mad Dog Tannen. It's the Old West. I expect him to wield a gun, to do things. He's an outlaw in the Old West.
Yeah, because I think I said this in our video too. Mad Dog, I think, is my favorite iteration of him, but I love what you're doing with 2 here.
In the first one, he's a bully. He's just your garden variety bully. Maybe a little bit of a rapist, from what we can see. Back to the Future 2 is Biff with the leash off.
Yeah.
Biff murders George McFly. Biff gets the opportunity to make himself rich and destroys everything in his path once he's there. He plots to kill Marty. Like, straight up pulls a gun and tries to kill him. I love Biff Tannen off the leash. I feel like Back to the Future 2 is Biff Tannen all the way, gas pedal, level 10.
What's really interesting about that is it's not even necessarily alternate reality Biff, but the 1955 Biff in 2 goes to great lengths. The whole car chase scene is big.
I think what the difference is between the two 1955 Biffs is in the first movie, his motivation is that he's a bully, he's a dick. In the second one, he has motivation, he has the almanac.
Yeah.
And he knows that he needs it to become successful, which pushes him further in how he does things. That's why he's willing to try to off Marty in the car and is willing to go a little more violent, because for Biff now, there's a goal. Originally in 1955, in the first movie, there wasn't really a goal, it was just to be a dick. That was his goal. But in part 2, he's got real motivation, and it fuels him to this level of insanity that I just love to see Biff Tannen be in.
If I remember correctly, also in the car chase, isn't he also being fueled by the humiliation?
Yeah.
From the dance.
So I think Biff has a lot more to process in part 2. Plus, you get, the fact that old man Biff goes back in time, steals the DeLorean.
Yeah.
Like, that's a pretty big feat. It's one of the biggest cars in movies.
There's even that deleted scene that shows that he, dies doing it.
Yeah. He sacrifices his future self to give his younger self a chance at more success. It's great. And the fact that, he owns this big casino, he's dedicated the whole town to himself.
Yeah.
It's great. It's so great. It's such a super obvious metaphor for someone else that we won't talk about, to risk the X's being clicked. But if you watch Back to the Future 2, it's super obvious. Super, super obvious. But I love the lengths that he goes to in part 2. And I also love, I love in the scene where he's telling Marty the story, he knows in his mind he's going to shoot Marty, but he tells him the story in the most calm way possible, where it's just like he's relaying it to somebody that he's having a normal conversation with. He does not give away until the end of that story that his end goal is to shoot Marty after hearing that story. And the way he tells, it's just, I love it. Biff Tannen in Back to the Future 2 is my jam.
There's also something creepy about that from Marty's point of view, because it's he's being awfully calm to me, Marty. Something's off.
And the way that Biff, as he tells that story and he wraps it up, he builds to and I was told some man, some crazy scientist, and his friend will come along, and I have to preserve this, and then he shows the gun. It's almost very Bond villain-esque.
Yeah, it's also it's like the reverse Michael in Godfather 2, where it's I never thought it'd be you.
Yeah.
All right, my number 9.
I knew that would make you happy because you mentioned earlier today that you wished that Biff would have made your list because you wanted to talk about Biff.
Yeah.
I know you love Mad Dog, but I had to go just Back to the Future 2 Biff.
I'm perfectly okay with that. My number 9 is Frank. Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West. Pretty much that prime example of casting against type for a very specific reason. And of course, you hear all the stories about how Fonda clearly didn't want it. Like, you look at the part and you're like, there's no way Fonda wanted to do this. Like, how the hell did they talk him into this? Apparently it was Eli Wallach that said, who he had just done The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and he was like, no, dude, you have to do it. Like, it's just, you have to do a Leone Western, you have to play the bad guy in it.
I wonder if the payback was Henry Fonda telling Eli Wallach, when they approach you to do the invisible, ask your scenes to be cut.
That's an in-joke that goes way back. So the thing about Frank that's very clear, first off, is the movie is about 2:45. It's an epic. And Frank has one scene and one line throughout the entire first hour. He just pops in once for that entire first hour. And in that open introductory shot, Henry Fonda, very, tall, clean cut, played Abe Lincoln. Always playing good guys. My Darling Clementine, he played Wyatt Earp. Always the good guy, always the level-headed one. The Grapes of Wrath, all this stuff. Opening shot of him in One Gone Down in the West, we see a family get shot down. A father, an older son, and a daughter, only leaving the young son, who is a kid, standing, watching this happen, looking at his dead family. And the person with the gun in the bushes, they all step out, and we pan up, and it's Henry Fonda with his blue eyes. And they say, what do you want? What should we do about the kid, Frank? And he said, well, now the kid knows my name. And Frank kills the kid. That's his opening scene. And that's the only time we see him in the entire first hour, is that. And it's like the fact that, and that's pretty much what Leone's purpose was like, that's the reason I need to cast Henry Fonda, was so that this moment is huge. So that carries with you. And then it's another one of those cases where it turns out he was really just a hired hand. And it doesn't stay that way. The dude that hired him ends up face down with multiple bullets in him. He didn't even, the guy was in a fight with Jason Robards and was left for dead. And Frank sees him laying there. The guy's already, has little use of his body. And he's laying, face down in the mud, still trying to survive. And Frank's gonna shoot him. And he's like, no, I'm just gonna let him lay there in the mud until he stops. Basically. And it's like, it does all come back to the fact that it's Henry Fonda's the shock value, but the way that he plays it, where it's so cold-blooded that it would have been a meaty role on paper anyway. It was really just kind of the cherry on top to make it an actor that was the last person you ever saw in this kind of part. And he says stuff like when we see him again in his second scene, and the guy that hired him is saying, I just told you to scare the family, and you slaughtered them. And his line is, well, people are more scared when they're dying, aren't they? Basically every moment he has in the movie is like that. And like I said, it's amazing that they even got him to do it at all. Because there's also he does the kind of scene in this that he had never done before, to the point that his wife had to be on the set. Where he has, I guess they technically call it a love scene. I don't know, but the guy that he killed, the family that he slaughtered, the guy's new wife was coming to town, and that's what the family was getting together to celebrate that when he slaughtered them. And his wife is pretty much the main character, and she's the one kind of at the center of what all's going on here. Because there's a whole side story where Charles Bronson comes in, basically doing the Eastwood part from the Dollar Trilogy. And he's got his own story of vengeance of why he's going after Frank. It gets to a point where it's one of those scenes where Frank is getting ready to die, and Bronson kills all the guys that are going after him so that he can have him for himself. Like that's kind of, and I don't want to give away what Frank did to Charles Bronson, but it's like harrowing. We see the flashback scene. The flashback scene has one line of dialogue, I think, one major line of dialogue, but it's like immediately you're like, oh, so yeah, this is why vengeance has been sought through this whole nearly 3-hour movie. It all makes perfect sense. And it's oh, and talking about that love scene with the guy's wife, where it's like I was wondering like who exactly did Frank kill apart from the kid, because we see the bullets just come out of the bushes and then they step out. So it's like any one of Frank's guys could have killed the husband. So he's with the wife and he's got her shirt off and he's like running his hands down her back and he's saying something along the lines of, how does it feel to be touched by the hands that killed your husband? It's like, oh, so he basically confirmed that he pretty much did it personally. And sometimes it's a petty thing where like a guy's wearing a belt and suspenders and he makes a comment about like, you don't even trust your own pants, and he shoots the guy here and here and then shoots him in the belt buckle just to make a point about that. And he's basically like the quintessential Western villain. Like, I mean, you could say like, you know, Liberty Valance and Jack Palance and Shane and stuff like that. But I think if you were to bring up, you can throw Lee Van Cleef into this, obviously. But if you were to ask me, like, name a Western villain, like, there's not even a question. Like, by a landslide, Frank will be the first one I'd bring up. And if there's one kind of villain that's like really specific, it's a Western villain. He's dressed all in black, all that whole thing. And it's, yeah, so that's a legendary villain. So
Alright, number 8. Number 8 for me is a little more run-of-the-mill. It's not too much out of the ordinary here. But I did deviate slightly. The AFI list went with the original Terminator. I opted for the T-1000 as my number 8. He's, like you called Simon Phoenix earlier, he's an actual killing machine. And he's out to kill a child.
Yep.
And so he's a machine, so there's no emotion behind it. He's manipulative. He can fucking morph.
I was gonna say, he's indestructible, basically.
Yeah, basically indestructible. And he doesn't stop. He does not fucking stop.
There's something so symbolic about his run, like not just that he can and that fast, but like when you get that image in your head of Robert Patrick running, your immediate thought is that is something that will never stop.
How Robert Patrick didn't become a bigger star out of this, I'll never know.
Yeah.
I will never know. But he's even got like the nice guy demeanor, like when he's interviewing about John's whereabouts.
The Galleria.
Yeah. and it's like he looks like he looks like an everyday person. Nothing against Robert Patrick, but there is nothing remarkable about his appearance. He looks like an ordinary dude that if you saw him pull somebody over on the side of the road, you wouldn't even think twice.
They actually used that. He really got to use that to his advantage in The Sopranos. So. But in countering that with the killing machine face, it's like two completely different personalities.
And now, if you watch something like, and Robert Patrick is one of the classic like villain actors. He's really good at it. It's his forte. But when you watch something like, I'll go ahead and cite this. If you watch The Marine, and you see how over the top and how much personality he brings, and then you go back and watch the T-1000, it's eerie how controlled he is with that. Like, he doesn't do anything over the top. And he's very determined. He's like Vincent, like you brought up in Collateral. He has one goal. He does not stop till he gets there, and you cannot stop him. But yeah, that's my number 8. I mean, the T-1000 has been talked about to death. The next few of mine have been talked about to death. But I just think the T-1000 is very haunting because there's nothing remarkable about him. He can blend in.
Yeah. He can even be the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alright, so my number 8.
Mm-hmm.
My number 8's going to take some explaining because I don't think many people have seen the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he does a lot of shit. But to make up for this, everyone after him should be a pretty quick thing. My number 8 is a gentleman by the name of Attila Melanchini, played by Donald Sutherland in the movie 1900 by Bernardo Bertolucci.
Okay.
This is... Let me put it... The movie puts it in a certain way for me. It's one of those movies where we start in, like, 1945, and then we go, when the characters are old, and then we go back, and then we see the movie, and then we come back around to this. The first time we see Attila in the movie, when he is older, much older, and he's, like, bald, he's being chased by an angry mob with pitchforks. They're throwing the pitchforks at him. They are sticking in his body, and he is still trying to run away with the pitchforks stuck in his body. Clearly, he's done some awful shit in his life. And we get to see his life throughout the rest of the movie. What led to this angry mob? Well, first and foremost, even though it's a long time before we get to, like, World War II era, he's essentially a Nazi in his youth and throughout his life. Or whatever, like, the sort of Italian era that would be. I think they call themselves, like, black shirts throughout it. But he's the kind of guy where, like I said, he starts like that, and also to give you a vibe, before saying anything specific, Donald Sutherland himself could not watch this movie for a long time, because playing this character put him off so much. Like, he was uncomfortable with himself. So he's doing this whole thing, and it's basically like, when it starts off and he's younger, it's more of like a class, like the whole movie is like a class struggle kind of thing. Where you got your people that are like in power and have the wealth, and you've got the people that are dismissed as like the peasants. And, like, the whole setup of the movie is you have two best friends who are De Niro and Gerard Depardieu, and De Niro's on the one side and Depardieu's on the peasant side, and they keep kind of reuniting as the years and decades go by. And there's kind of one antagonist that's always coming back as well, and that would be him. So when it starts, he just kind of has like that sort of almost, he's like Waldo in The Little Rascals or something, only more like, what's the word I'm looking for? Despicable. And he's really condescending, and he's always joking around about peasants and stuff like that. But then, yeah, once he brings politics into it and starts rising to power, then it becomes an issue where it's like he and his, if I remember correctly, he and his men have started like this mass fire. And so there's like a whole mass funeral of all of these open coffins with like charred people inside them. And it's this massive funeral, and they're marching down. And then when they go find him, he's in this clothing store getting his new uniform made up, thinking nothing of it. And when one of the guys walks in, he's like, "Oh, you look like you've been to a funeral." It's like, yes, a mass funeral with a fire that we're pretty sure you started. And then this ends up being like his whole, I'm not just, putting on clothes. This is going to be a symbol, and people are going to follow this. People are going to wear this. And he does that whole thing. And in the same scene, he's building all this up. He's building up his following. And he goes outside, and he has this whole group follows him. And he takes a cat. And he's like, "I'm just going to do a demonstration." And he uses a belt to tie the cat to like a wall. And then he says, "Now imagine this cat is communism. This is my plan." And he goes all the way back, and he runs and smashes the cat to death with his head.
Jesus.
And then he just turns to everybody very calmly with this cat's blood all over his face, saying, like, this is what we're going to do with communism. And then throughout the rest of the movie, he's just committing murders as he's rising to power. There's at one point where they do something that's unspeakable to a child. He and his future wife. Where they've had their way with this child. And then, in the most brutal manner you can think of, this child is killed. More or less by accident, but then he keeps revving it up. And then blames it on Gerard Depardieu and says, the peasants did this. And that goes on. And then much later in the movie, he impales an old woman on her gate, her front gate, so that he can have her land. What does he do? He returns to the crime scene as the crowd has gathered to see this impaled body, and what's he say? Communists, peasants did this. That's his go-to. Communists did it, or peasants did it, or both. And Gerard Depardieu gets shunned for a long time because they think that he killed the kid. And then, yeah, and that's basically, this is just kind of, like, this is just a few examples. This movie is 5 hours and 17 minutes. And he continuously comes back. And every time he comes back, something fucked up happens. It's like, these are just some examples. And, yeah, and then, of course, eventually he is... It's weird. The year before this was The Day of the Locust. Also a movie where Donald Sutherland kills a child brutally. Also a movie where, because of this, Donald Sutherland is killed by an angry mob. It happened 2 years in a row to him. So, that's, like I said, that's just a taste of this guy. This movie's over 5 hours.
So since he's played by Donald Sutherland, are we saying that President Snow from the Hunger Games probably started here?
It's very, like, given that it's a rise to power the whole time, very likely. So, I mean, he really, well, I don't know. I was going to say he really calmed down his methods, but then again, yeah, Attila would probably say, hey, let's get a bunch of kids together and watch them kill each other. Yeah.
And blame the communists.
Yeah, and make it political, of course he would.
And I haven't seen the movie, but it sounds like, because Donald Sutherland has a very, like, soft, soothing voice as well. It would be easy for Donald Sutherland to manipulate someone.
Yeah, there's a lot of speechifying coming from him. So, yeah, like I said, that's a taste, what I just said. So, yeah, that's my number 8.
Okay, my number 7, there's not much to say because he's been talked about to death. This is a very common person to show up on a list like this. So this will be very brief. Number 7 is Hans Gruber.
I thought he would show up on
He's probably the classiest villain on this list.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few that he never really loses control. He gets cocky right at the end, but until then, I would never say that he loses control. Everyone around him does.
Yeah, because with the exception of getting away, his plan falls through. Like, his plan happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens even with John McClane being the constant buzzing in his ear. He still manages to get his plan off. And he's so calm and collected about it. Like, he has all the answers. Like, his people come in and they're like, oh my god, the police are here. What are we going to do? Well, just call me when the FBI gets here. Yeah. And then the FBI gets there and he's like, they're going to help us. Like, this is all part of it. And he's so smart with that. And just the fact, I mean, come on, he's John McClane's first baddie.
Yeah.
Like, and he doesn't feel the need to make it personal until the very end. He still keeps it. He gets pissed off, but he doesn't get personal till the very end.
He's constantly piecing things together. Like, almost nothing gets by him.
Yeah. He's probably, I would say he's probably the smartest villain on this list. There might be, my top 2 might be smarter.
When we talk about how smart and how cunning he is, what's, like, it's the whole movie, but what's the one scene that comes to mind?
Are you talking about where he's pretending to be Bill Clay?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, because the accent's gone, like, And he's just very calmly and coolly talking to McLean, just biding his time, building that trust. Of course, McLean knows he's full of shit.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he takes his time to build that trust of what he thinks he's doing. And it's not really that he did anything to slip it up. It's just McLean just knew. Like, McLean was like, yeah, there's no way this guy got up here by himself.
And another moment that always comes to mind that's always a really big moment, especially with how late it comes in, is when he figures out who Holly is.
Yeah.
And it's like immediately, it's like, oh, advantage.
Yeah. And he doesn't make a big show of it or anything. He's just like, yep, you're coming with me because I know who you are now.
We didn't even mention the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
When he immediately sets up the kind of villain that he is, and the, like, trust me, I have control of everything. With Takagi, we learn that he's a villain where he says, you know, if you don't do this, I'm gonna have to kill you. And that is what's going to happen. No question. Because it's that well planned. It's like, we can do it this way, but I got a whole other bunch of shit I can do if this doesn't happen. And you don't need to be a part of this at all. You can die right now.
I love one of the things that he does to make a point is when he kills Ellis, and everybody starts screaming from the gunfire, and his only response is he just holds the walkie out so McLean can hear everybody losing their mind.
Yeah.
He doesn't say a word. That spoke for itself. He's such a great, classy villain. I mean, he's like, Hans Gruber could have very easily been a Bond villain. Very easily.
Bond may not have made it if he was a Bond villain.
Right? He wouldn't have fucked around. Like, he would have... Like, at the very end, he gets cocky. But, I mean, he has no reason to think otherwise. McLean is so busted by the time they get back to being face-to-face that Hans probably thinks, I could just wait this out. He'll just fucking fall over.
Do you think the final thing that brought him down was... It was having Holly that got him too cocky?
I think so.
Because it'd be like the thing that would make you go, oh, I literally, like, this is like fail-safe.
I've won. This is all I need to do. And the fact that even after he gets shot, he doesn't let go.
Yeah.
And he's hanging out a window being shot. He is still ready to fire off the kill shot. If Ellis hadn't given her that watch, who knows?
Of all the people, this... Because I was kind of getting ready to make the comment of, it's like, hearing everybody scream about what's happened to Ellis. It's like, that's really the only way to have any effect about that, because who's going to miss Ellis?
Yeah. So that's my number 7, is Hans Gruber.
Alright.
Jeremy Irons is great, too. If we were doing like a top 20, Jeremy Irons probably would have made it.
Yeah. My number 7 is, once again, another movie I'm not sure how many people are familiar with. My number 7 is Tommy Udo.
How have we gotten this far and not repeated?
Yeah. And he is Richard Widmark's character in Kiss of Death, which is like a little noir thing from 1947 that he scored an Oscar nomination for. And this was based... I mean, I'm sure there's other examples of this, but when you talk about the ones that were like really influential, he was basically the jumping off point for that whole trope of the villain that starts off as the hired hand that you lose control of. Like, he was basically the blueprint for everything we've seen of that. Where we have the lawyer we have our criminal main character who has done a robbery that's gone wrong and gotten caught. He and Tommy actually end up in prison together for a brief period of time. And then when it comes to later, when the guy's lawyer is saying, like, you know, we gotta keep this from getting out of control, we've got, like, there's people that know too much, there's people that are gonna squeal and all that stuff. So there's one particular guy that's gotten way out of hand that we need to silence. And I'm gonna send Tommy to take care of him. And Tommy is this guy where, I don't know if you know what Richard Widmark looks like. He's got very much, this is obviously reverse technically, but he's got a very Frank Gorshin vibe. and up to like his appearance as well as his grin and his laugh. Like Tommy Udo has an insane laugh, but it's not like over the top. It's just like really, really creepy and like something bad is about to happen. So the most famous scene in not just the movie but in like film noir history is he goes to take this guy out, but the guy's not home, but his wheelchair-bound mother is. Remember, this is a movie in 1947, so a lot of, like, any kind of violence was going to be kind of shocking and unheard of for the time. So he's talking to this older wheelchair-bound woman whose son is a criminal, but she's not fully aware of what's going on. Like, maybe she's helping him hide, maybe she's not, it's hard to tell, but more often than not, she's not like a complete... She's not in this. She's just a bystander, more or less. While he's doing that little laugh and that smile, he's ripping a cord out of the wall. He ties her to her wheelchair and shoves her down the steps and kills her. Which is like one of the most famous scenes in like film noir history.
It's funny that you bring up Frank Gorshin because I think of what Jim Carrey did to Ed Begley Jr.
Yeah. That may or may not be a callback. I don't know. The thing here also is that he's that's how unhinged he is. Like, that's his means of doing things. So then eventually we get to that point. Once again, he's another one where he's not in it that much, but he left that, like, he even got an Oscar nomination for it. That's how much of an impression he left. But we see him one more time kind of in the middle, and it's like the guy's gonna get some information on him and kind of talk to him about, you know, the insane shit that he's planning or has done or has going on, and then he's gonna come back and testify in court to get him put away. And Tommy gets acquitted after the main character has testified against him. That's what the third act... That's the lead into the third act. So that paranoia I was talking about with, like, Bruno Anthony is, like, in full swing. You're like, he's the big threat through the entire third act. And we only see him, like, twice briefly before everything goes off. And it's all build up and paranoia because he's built himself up so much beforehand with just a couple of scenes that you just feel constant, like, it's really intense. All the paranoia and leading in and not knowing if he's coming, because he says, like, I'm gonna come for you, but also, like, your wife and, oh yeah, your kids, just all of them. There's a really great shot too that's not talked about enough where, like, he's going around town looking for him to kind of confront him and say, like, whatever you're, like, I can still put you away, so whatever you're doing or whatever you're planning, just don't. Like, he's gonna try to intimidate him, but he's really kind of begging him. Like, don't do it. And he's looking all over town for Tommy and can't find him. And then finally, Tommy sees him through a crack in the door from, like, a distance. And we watch through the crack in the door Tommy, like, make a beeline towards the camera. And he's terrifying. He's absolutely terrifying. And like I said, really just how influential he was for that trope that I love so much. The villain that starts off as a side villain when he's the biggest threat. Is one of my favorite types of villains there is, and he was basically the blueprint. So I'd be remiss if he wasn't here.
Okay. So we're up to number 6. We're almost in top 5 territory.
Yep.
So number 6 is my artsy choice. So, going back to number 15. Shooter McGavin. Shooter McGavin was unsuccessful in what he wanted to do. So what does it look like if you're Shooter McGavin, but you succeed, and you succeed way more than you could have ever expected? You get number 6 for me, who is Salieri in Amadeus.
Oh, yes.
Salieri's main motivation is that Mozart is better than him, and Mozart is fucking annoying. That is his 2 tenets of motivation. He takes this motivation and takes a prodigy genius like Mozart, who everyone loves, and is so likable to the rest of the world. It's a great example of those people that you see that everyone loves, and you're like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. And what does he do with this? He spends time psychologically torturing him to where he wears himself down and dies. goddamn. In the fucking 1700s in prim proper European culture. I don't know what else to add to that. I really don't know what else you can say. I mean, that is a fucked up plan. It is so fucked up.
And a very deserved Oscar win.
Yes, F. Murray Abraham is a fucking gem in this film.
Because there is something about those villains that are the protagonist in their own story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he clearly is. We start the story with him having attempted suicide, and he's talking to a priest, and by the time we get done, the priest is even like, the fuck? Like, he's like, this guy is awful. And Salieri just tells it like, you know, he was annoying. He was better than me. He had to go. He had to be gone. But what do you do with him? He's already in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
Because he tried to kill himself. What do you do at that point? He just lives out his days there. And by the time he gets there, he's old. He's committed suicide when he's old. He's gotten away with this his entire life. His entire later of life. He accomplished his goal and got away with it. How many villains have we mentioned tonight that can say the same thing? And the fact is he's like... This is such a crude reference. But he's like Jigsaw. He let Mozart run himself into the ground. He never did anything to push him further to death other than to psychologically torture him. He pushed Mozart in such a dark hole and made sure that he died poor. Like, Salieri saw this guy and was like, fuck this dude. I'm taking everything. And he fucking took it, and he got away with it. Like, how can a villain like that not make the list? To take somebody so likable to the rest of the world and break him. He fucking broke him. To the point where he died. Like... How does that not make the list? He's just... And he's so angry through the whole movie. So angry. And before, when you first meet him, he's kind of, like, uppity. But he doesn't, like... You don't get the impression that he wants to just fuck someone's life up. And that's exactly what he does to Mozart. And his main motivation, he's better than me, and he's annoying as shit. He must go. So, there's nothing more I can say about that. That's just, that's fucking cruel. Anything you'd like to add?
I would say that sums it up, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. So that's number 6 for me.
Alright, I think my number 6 is the first time I cross over with the AFI list.
Okay.
Once again, I've done a video on this, and it's been talked about a lot, and also kind of speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6 is Frank Booth.
Ah.
You and I bring this up every time, you and I had the great pleasure of seeing Blue Velvet in a theater, in a completely packed theater.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention the fact that I took you to Wilmington and you got to see some things where Blue Velvet was filmed.
Yeah, we were in, like, the bar and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
the dude didn't tell us we were in the bar until we were in the bar. And it was like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the Fiona Shaw skeleton from Super Mario Brothers is behind the bar that
Mm-hmm.
Hopper gifted them.
Yeah.
Yeah, what can you say about Frank Booth that hasn't already been said? Just immediately when he walks into the room, it's just, like, it's already this sort of terrifying voyeuristic scenario. Like, the voyeuristic scenario in itself of Jeffrey in the closet watching
Mm-hmm.
already gives you this sort of weird rush that's also kind of got every, like, sense heightened.
Mm-hmm.
And then this guy walks in.
Mm-hmm.
And much like Jeffrey, we don't really know what to expect the first time around. We sure as fuck know what to expect once this one scene is over.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's one of the funniest things that, like, the big laugh that it got in the theater when we see everything Frank does to Isabel Rossellini. And then the next day, on the phone, Laura Dern asks him, you know, how did it go? And he's like, it went okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, apparently, the mask, the original plan was it was going to be helium.
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out that it was like, maybe people won't take that seriously. Like, I can see on paper where it's like, that would be freaky and weird. But I like that the scariness just comes from what Hopper's doing. And how, like, he almost becomes like this really dangerously horny and vicious dog.
Mm-hmm.
When he's around her. And it's like I said, in the moment, if you're seeing it for the first time, like Jeffrey is, you don't know what's happening, where this is going to go, how far it's going to go,
Mm-hmm.
what he's done before, what he's capable of that hasn't happened yet. And he's just completely unpredictable every time. Like, he's like, when he shows up, it's almost like a horror movie. Another thing I love to bring up is, I don't know if you remember that row of girls that was sitting in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
There was that one girl in particular where Hopper would just walk on the screen. Like, it's the scene where he accidentally runs into him in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, like, who is this fuck? And stuff like that. When he and Hopper ran into each other in the hallway, that girl in front of us covered her eyes. It was like, what does that say about the kind of villain Frank Booth is? And then the fact that he sort of takes you on this whole thing. Like, the whole movie could have been going joyriding with him. Like, when they go see Dean Stockwell, when they go see Ben.
Mm-hmm.
And it's...
Now I want a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas type movie with Frank Booth.
That's basically what the whole middle portion is. And it's like going farther and farther down that dark path. And it's like it's uncomfortable enough being in a strange place and not knowing where you're going to go next. But when this is the guy that's in the driver's seat, and it's it's a whole other level. But like I said, I have done a Blue Velvet video, so I've gone into depth with this. Is there anything you remember? Because I think you have an interesting outlook on this. Because if I remember correctly, your only Blue Velvet viewing ever is that theater viewing with that crowd.
Yeah.
Which had to feel unique.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember feeling like, since you didn't know what was going to happen, do you remember feeling on edge like every time he was even in the frame?
Yeah, you never knew what was going to happen. You never knew.
And it's, Hoosiers is great, and he's great in Hoosiers, but the only reason he got an Oscar nomination for Hoosiers was because Blue Velvet's an acquired taste. I mean, Lynch got in director, but when you look at Frank and that kind of character, it's like, we can go with the much more, likable Hoosiers character.
Alright, so we're in top 5 territory.
Yep.
It's time for me to take a dance with the AFI list. 2 of my last 5 will take a dance with the AFI list. So number 5 for me, so the setup is let's take, for example, Doyle in Sling Blade. Okay? You know that they're bad, but nobody believes you because of what you've been branded and who the people are around you that are witnessing it. And it's supposed to be somebody that is supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to help you get your shit in order. Number 5 is Nurse Ratched.
Of course.
Yes. How helpless would you feel if you had a whole room of witnesses, but because they were insane, they thought what you were saying was insane, even if you're not? She's supposed to be there to help you, and at the end of the day, she is taking advantage of mentally ill people to make her own self feel better. That's fucked up. I work in social work. That's fucked up. There's not much that you could say that can't already be said. Just the way that she does the things that she does and just gives that look like, I know I'm getting away with it and there's not a fucking thing you can do to stop it. And the one time that somebody did lash out to try to stop it, lost their entire sense of being.
And notice how it builds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just starts with her saying the voting is ended.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, I hate her. And then the way that builds and builds and gets, the stakes get a little more.
It's that classic case of she's just having toying with them and poking the bear, and she poked the bear one too many times.
When you say
She poked the bear by poking the bear's little sidekick.
Yeah, I was gonna say where is the cutoff between, is it Billy killing himself, or is it getting strangled by McMurphy? But I forget that's the same moment.
That all happens within the span of 10 seconds. And it's very quick. And it's enough that by the end of the movie, she's been shocked enough that she's starting to come around a little bit better. But look at the lengths it took to get her to do it.
But at the same time, though, she's so bad, you get that vibe of once that neck brace is off, is she gonna regress?
It makes you wonder. It really does make you wonder. And the fact that you can't tell anybody because nobody's going to believe you because you either are or supposedly are mentally ill.
It's another thing too. We were talking about like the not changing of expression. Like she would like ruin one of their lives and keep the same tone. And it's the tone where when you get angry with her, you're like all she has to do is say you sound unreasonable because I'm so calm. And it's like it's no wonder she gets strangled.
Yeah.
I didn't bother with Sarah Paulson's show, did you?
No.
It just looked way too Ryan Murphy. And I just it's a cool idea, but I'm not gonna bother. It's like even when you get to the point you're bringing McMurphy into it, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's too much Ryan Murphy is too much.
You said you didn't repeat directors. Well, just for the record, I just repeated back to back.
Yeah, Milos Forman. When I was trying to remember, because I said I didn't repeat directors. Did you? I wasn't thinking Milos Forman. Of course. I should have seen Salieri coming, and I just didn't for some reason. He was just.
Dude, he is so fucked up.
I also love that you accidentally even matched number on Ratchet in the AFI list.
That's not the last time that'll happen.
Well, my number 5 is also on the AFI list.
Okay.
At I don't remember which number because it's too dark right now. My number 5 is HAL 9000. Is some options as far as Kubrick goes, as far as villains. But HAL's, as far as legendary villains, and as far as villains that are, there's something about obvious. It seems a little obvious to go with an inhuman villain because they can't feel. But then that kind of comes into question. One of Hal's dying words, one of Hal's dying phrases is "I can feel it," and it's Hal's one of those villains that when I keep saying when it's dying, it gets scarier. But the thing is when you're watching a movie like 2001 and you hear a computer talking that you can talk back to, and it's set in the future, you think nothing of that. It's oh, that's just another thing in this world. So if you're watching 2001, you don't know the direction it's going, and you see Hal for the first time, even the first time we see the red eye, which is really intimidating. I believe the first shot of the red eye is just the when the guy's on the revolving floor, and we see that reflected in Hal, and it's oh, that's a cool shot. And then Dave's talking to him. They're he's saying oh, can I see your pictures? He's just it's basically having another crew member that just happens to have control of everything. And in that kind of world, in that kind of setup, you don't think anything of the computer with the common voice. And
which is funny now because now we have Siri and Alexa and Google Speak
and when everybody talks about how creepy it can be to have stuff like that that's that convenient, but could be, as far as consumers, unintentionally getting something that's potentially intrusive. And
We get that now. Like, I swear, there have been things that me and Susan have talked about, and I open up Google and it offers it. Like, it's very off-putting.
And the whole idea of people saying, like, in the future we could have problems with AI going rogue.
Mm-hmm.
What does that thought come back to? Fucking Hal.
Yeah.
And then it's like, once Hal goes rogue, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. That's the most famous line in the movie is, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, open the pod bay doors, Hal, is one of the quotes on the AFI list of quotes. And I feel like the reason it's there is not that line, it's the follow-up line. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it goes from eventually he becomes homicidal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's the people in the pods that are on, like, their life is being supported, and he just shuts them down.
Mm-hmm.
And he cuts the cord, and the dude just goes off. He takes out the entire crew except for Dave, and it becomes basically like man versus monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I almost get the vibe that Alien
Mm-hmm.
found influence in 2001,
Yeah.
and Hal is literally just a disembodied voice. How fucking terrifying is that?
And it comes across too like there's elements of Nurse Ratched in there, and the T-1000 where there's just no emotion.
Yeah. I need to say Douglas Rain's name while I'm talking about this. If I don't, that would be an absolute disservice. Douglas Rain does the voice, and it is so... It's that calm... Like, I can't imagine Hal with another voice that would be as intimidating or terrifying. And the fact that it's intimidating because it's not intimidating. That makes sense, right? In this context. And then you go into the whole thing of when Hal is shutting down. And he's saying things like, Dave, stop. Dave, I can feel it. And then when he's kind of reset, and he says, I'm going to sing you a song. And Dave's basically saying, like, yes, sing a song to distract you from me killing you. And then as he's singing Daisy and his voice starts slowing down. I remember watching you watch that scene and how creeped out you were at the sound of Hal's voice as he's dying. And that's the fucked up thing too. I keep saying he. That's like the scariest thing. Yeah, anything else that could be said has probably already been said, but that's pretty much the gist of it, yeah.
Alright, so number 4. Number 4 for me spans over multiple movies. Number 4 for me is the Joker. It's a role that's won 2 actors an Oscar for playing it 2 completely different ways. It's a character that's versatile, you can do a lot with. Every incarnation brings something to the table. Yes, even Jared Leto's brings something to the table.
This is another thing we've done a whole video on.
Yeah, so I don't have to spend too much time on this. But he's iconic. My little one, when we first got her, didn't know anything about superheroes. She knew who the fucking Joker was, and she knew him by name. And she loves him. She loves him with a passion. He's easily identifiable. I love his plots because when one fails, we just start a new one. Like, oh, that didn't work. Let's do this. Like, it makes it very hard. It's a very hard person to fight because he has so many plans, but there's hardly any motivation behind any of it. The motivation is just, this be fun. It could be funny.
And when I was talking about like the It miniseries and then the new movies, I was talking about the fascination with clowns, but specifically evil clowns.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just the idea of their appearance, just in general, pops so much. They're so bright and colorful in like their own festive way.
Yeah.
And then you match that with what they do.
Yeah, and it's just like with Nurse Ratched and the T-1000 again. Their facade or their outward appearance is something that's supposed to bring you joy or help you in some way, and that's not the case with him at all. Like, you go to the circus and you see a clown, you think, oh, this is time to laugh, unless you're scared of clowns. And don't tell me that the Joker is not the reason that some people are afraid of clowns. He has to be.
Especially with a newer generation that's like growing up with the Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And I tell everybody, I'm like, I understand that Heath Ledger's great, but you've got to give Nicholson his due.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the AFI list.
Now, so I think
he got nominated for a goddamn Golden Globe, which by then was unheard of for a character like that. Now, 2 Oscars, it's boring now that he got nominated for a Golden Globe. Whoop-de-doo. But back then, you didn't get awards for roles like that. Comics were kids stuff. It was cartoons and Adam West and serials. It wasn't serious award contenders. And to me, like, you are talking about a story where the protagonist is a man that puts on body armor and dresses himself up to look like a 6-foot bat, and this fucker's crazier than that. like that's an accomplishment.
That you see the Joker and your thought is, we need the other crazy guy.
Yeah, it's Cinemaniac to get a maniac. Yeah. Back from Demolition Man, which, ironically enough, Simon Phoenix is a lot like the Joker.
Yeah.
Both of their motivations are just, let's just see how much we can fuck up and how fast we can do it. And let's watch everybody fucking scramble. So that's number 4 for me.
Alright, so you said you only had one Disney villain.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that approach as well. Might seem pretty obvious, especially if you saw our top 15 movies video.
Mm-hmm.
Or just might seem obvious, even if you didn't see that video. My number 4 is Scar.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, I did a lengthy video on it as a Versus with the Jungle Book, and then we also talked about it being one of my top 15 movies. Yeah, one of the first things that comes to mind when you think of that movie in general is how incredibly evil Scar is. Mm-hmm. I went into a whole thing in that first video about how, really think about what Scar's plan is. With, like, the Stampede, to kill Mufasa, do the whole thing. So, I'm assuming we're under the impression that he wants to... Was the Stampede intended to kill Simba? Because he does the whole thing where work on your roar, mm-hmm. basically start the Stampede yourself. Mm-hmm. But then at some point, he knew that Mufasa was going to die in this moment at some point. And he could use the work on your roar thing as a guilt trip and say, you started the Stampede, you killed him. Mm-hmm. And then, after he goes through that whole elaborate thing, to put that in Simba's mind, the very next thing he says after Run Away, Never Return is he tells the hyenas to kill Simba right now. So what Scar's plan seems to be was kill Mufasa, think tiny little child Simba, make him think that he's responsible for his father's own death for the small window of time he was going to be alive before being killed by the hyenas. Is that the plan?
It must be.
Do that whole elaborate setup to make him believe that he's responsible for it, just so he thinks that right before you kill him. Mm. That seems to be what the plan is. For God's sake. What is... Whatever happened to good old-fashioned murder? But this is your whole thing. Because obviously he's essentially Claudius. Yeah, that's the whole idea. But then not only does all of this succeed, except for the killing Simba thing, mm-hmm. He just ruins Pride Rock. Are we under the impression that was intentional?
He pisses all over it.
Yeah, it makes...
I think the intention is just to show that he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility.
All he wanted to do was lay back, listen to Zazu sing, and let the hyenas eat whatever they wanted. And then everything was just stripped and gone by the end of this. And all these even the whole thing about, sicking the hyenas on them in general, like tricking Simba to go to the elephant graveyard. And, like, everything is so calculated with him. Like, he knows exactly the move everybody's going to make. And some might say that's plot convenience, but others might say that's a very prepared villain that knows exactly what he wants.
Here's my question. Let's say the hyenas succeed in killing Simba at the elephant graveyard. Let's say that plan succeeds. He talks about how Mufasa is more physically gifted than him. How did he expect to take out Mufasa?
I feel like I wonder if maybe the stampede was always a plan, because that's a pretty elaborate plan. But yeah, I feel like with that character, I feel like it could be anything. And that's what, like, he's such a calculated character in this story that's supposed to be a children's story, but at the same time it's Hamlet, and it's, family members killing you. I've always made that joke that "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" playing, basically being the movie's theme, almost feels like sarcasm, because it's about family members killing each other. Yeah, and of course Jeremy Irons' perfect voice work. We can bring up Chiwetel, I guess, if we're doing spanning movies thing, the Favreau's movie, and I thought he was a cool choice, but they didn't really. That movie just kind of in general made everything kind of bland. And the whole idea was that, I mean, I know he wanted to kind of go for a mostly like black cast, and like I said, Chiwetel's an amazing choice with an amazing voice. But Jeremy Irons actually said once in an interview that if somehow, some way it came up that he could return to Scar, that he would have. And it's like, well, damn it. Because James Earl Jones came back. But it's, I guess also at the same time it is kind of, especially when we see how that movie turned out, even with the talent behind it, it's just kind of having this one-off with Jeremy Irons adds something to that character and makes it really feel like it's this sort of lightning in a bottle thing, I guess. But yeah, just incredibly, that's probably a lot of children's first look at a truly sadistic character, would it not be?
Could be.
A really well-calculated, evil character.
Because you think, oh, it's animals. Kids like animals.
And then he's just even his appearance is like, yeah, he's a villain. That whole thing where, like, his claws never retract or go back, they're always out all the time.
So he's Lenny.
The cat that hasn't made an appearance in this room.
No, she's upstairs in bed.
So is that pretty much Scar?
I would say so.
Anything to add?
I don't think so.
Yeah, complete psycho.
Yeah.
And it's the whole thing where it's like the plan is layered, where it's almost like you could say, was it this plan or was it this plan, because they don't really match up, but it's like, probably just, if this failed, this thing's already planned. Like, whatever's gonna make these people die, whatever's gonna make my family die. So, yeah, that's Scar in a nutshell, I think.
My number 3, I'm going to match the AFI list for the last time. You're looking right at the list. Number 3 is Vader. So I know the points that you made earlier about him being a puppet. But number 1, fucking look at him. He just looks like bad news. He has the Force powers. Like, and I would go with Vader, all throughout the series even. And Star Wars is a great, the New Hope is a great introduction to him. Super great
when he comes out of the smoke.
Yeah, that's such a great introduction. Empire really shows the reach that he has as far as getting what he wants with his little deal with Lando, even though Lando reneges on it. Return of the Jedi, the only way to beat him was literally to just turn him good, because otherwise Luke was not going to win.
I love the scene in Empire when they basically do like that little raid,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like it's not just stormtroopers or Imperials or whatever. He's like there. He's like first in line.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the cases where like he has all the stormtroopers that he can use, but he's right there in the mix of it. He's on the ground floor making sure shit gets done, and taking out anybody that's fucking it up for everybody else. And I love his scenes in Rogue One.
Yeah.
I love them so much. Like when he tells Ben Mendelsohn, "Don't choke on your aspirations." Yes, it's a very James Bond like line, but the way he delivers it is just so cruel. I love it. And then the scene with the lightsaber in the hallway. Good God. Good fucking God.
Yeah,
That scene's amazing.
Because a lot of people think the scene is overhyped at this point because it's like the thing you take away from Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Rogue One is like action packed.
I really enjoy Rogue One.
Yeah.
Like, I may be in the minority here, but I really enjoy Rogue One.
But it's that thing where it's like he doesn't get to do anything in Revenge of the Sith because as soon as he becomes Vader, that's the end of that portion of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, then into A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when they made Rogue One, they were saying we need a little transition here to show how lethal he is as Vader before we get into A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like watch that last scene of him in Rogue One, and then immediately turn on A New Hope and see just how much. But that's the thing too is like just A New Hope by itself, without him having to do something that big, is still just as effective.
Yeah. And I think another thing that really helps with him too is, we talked about a couple villains like this earlier tonight that are this way. He is so far gone that he is, until the end of Return of the Jedi, he believes he is wired to be evil, and that's all he's able to do. He can't break out of that cycle. Because Luke, like, pesters the shit out of him in Return of the Jedi to turn back, and he's just like, I can't fucking do it. There's nothing here. And then he finds that last little ounce to help out. And it's kind of a cheesy shot now, but I really love the shot of when the Emperor's Force lightning is firing, and you see the skull through the black helmet.
Yeah.
That's really cool. But yeah, I just think he's and I know the jokes, all the jokes of you get this guy in a big black suit, you take it off, old white dude underneath. But
The chasing gaming monologue.
yeah, exactly. No, I just think he's a great character. He's got great presence. Great presence. Like Palpatine, like I see where you're coming from with Palpatine, but I think a lot of people can look at Palpatine and like that's a withered old man until he whips out the Force lightning.
Yeah.
But when you first see him, like it's like, oh, it's just just a manipulative old man. When you see Vader, it's like, I'm not fucking dealing with that. Fuck you.
That opening scene of Return of the Jedi, when he shows up and you can see the fear in everybody.
Yeah, like he's a dude with stage presence.
Mind you, in my defense, when they find out the Emperor's coming, they look even more scared. But
yeah, but that's essentially like the CEO's coming down to do a floor walk.
I remember almost wanting to hide my eyes during the opening scene of Return of the Jedi when he comes down the ramp because he's just so intimidating.
And just his walk, like he just walks so deliberately and with purpose.
His steps are so heavy, like in sound and everything.
I love the little detail that his only direct interaction with Han Solo is when they open the door at Cloud City, and Han's first instinct is to fire, and Vader just brushes it off. Like, none of that shit. Get that out of here. That's amateur. Fuck off. So yeah, that's my number 3, and that's the last time that I crossed with the AFI list.
Alright. My number 3 is another person that comes from one of my top 15 movies. My number 3 is John Doe. Spacey and Seven. Another one of those things where it's like...
I just realized we're gonna go this whole list without crossing.
Are we?
But by stuff that you told me earlier, yes. Pretty sure.
We'll see.
Have you looked up my list?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
But I know what's already gone by.
Ah, okay. Okay.
But John Doe. John Doe, first off, brings into account this whole thing of the idea of hiding the identity of the actor is very cool. And making that a big deal in itself. And getting a performance like what Spacey gives here is one of the quintessential villain performances. Because he's another one of those cases where it's like he's calm, but there's a lot of times where he's breaking through early. Like the whole like you would expect that he wouldn't, like, if I remember like I think it's because the plan is falling into place so perfectly. This is another one that's his plan goes as perfectly, like he wins. Like Freeman straight up says that.
He would rate high on the success category.
Yeah. But the idea that when they're in the car on the way there is when he's kind of breaking out a little bit. And he's like, his anger towards the people that he was going after and his motive is there. But when they're in the desert and his plane is going perfectly, he never breaks like that again. He's calm all the way to his death once they get to the desert because it's all going exactly as it was supposed to.
I said the only other time he really loses his cool is in the police station when just no one will acknowledge him.
Yeah. Which is a great introduction. Probably one of the most famous like killer introductions there is. Because not only is it, you know, like startling when he screams at them, but that's also the reveal of, holy shit, it's Spacey. I've always wondered, he's amazing as Verbal in Usual Suspects, for which he won an Oscar the same year. I've always wondered how much this might have kind of played a part in him having Usual Suspects and this got him the Oscar, I wonder. But yeah, and it's interesting to kind of talk about a villain that you don't see till like the end. But everything that's done with these victims is building up to something or somebody. And we do get the moment when they go to his apartment and he accidentally comes home, and we see kind of how acrobatic he is. There's almost something Phantom-like about him. Like I like how we kind of get it's almost like a comic booky outline of him without seeing anything when he's in that apartment scene. And then we finally get a dose of his voice in the phone call right after that. And we just kind of gradually get to that point to where he's like slowly revealed to us. But seeing what he's capable of through the whole movie before we get to any of that, and it's some of the most grotesque imagery in at least an R-rated movie. Like movies that go beyond, that have to be released unrated or NC-17 or something. But in the confines of an R rating, just as pretty much as far as grotesque imagery can go. At least for the time period. We can do more fucked up shit now, but 1995, that was probably kind of right there at the end of the envelope when you say. Like I said, just Spacey's performance of being like so calm and being, whether we like it or not, seemed to be the smartest person in any room he was in. With maybe Freeman being the closest to being on his level as far as seeing where things, because obviously you're dealing with Pitt, who's still the young hothead, who's the absolute worst kind of person to go up against John Doe because he's, once again, an exact quote, going to have the upper hand the whole time.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's already taken care of Gwyneth Paltrow once he gets there. Like, that whole reveal is, like, so incredibly... It's one of those cases where it's such a shocking reveal when you first see it. You're expecting it to not be what you think it is. But it is. And he says it so casually, like, well, this, you know, that's my sin, and that's what that led to. As if it's the most, like, it's the most logical thing to him, like, well, it didn't work out, so the only logical step in my mind was that. Which, of course, fits perfectly in the whole become Wrath David.
Yeah.
So it's all... It's almost terrifying how brilliant Seven's script is. I think that a lot, like apparently a lot of people were put off by it at the time because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like we shouldn't be able to acknowledge a serial killer like John Doe for being as brilliant as he was.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my number 3.
Okay. My number 2 is the only villain that we've talked about so far tonight that you get the pleasure of watching die twice. Not to mention the fact that you take the villain in their final little showdown, and their showdown is with 24 movies worth of heroes and side characters, and you have pissed these people off that far that you have warranted that kind of attention as a response. Number 2 for me, as much as it pains me to put something Marvel over DC, number 2 is Thanos. On my rating scale, Thanos broke the ceiling on threat level. He fucking broke it. And he broke it in his first 5 minutes at Infinity War. When he beat the Hulk like a fucking redheaded stepchild. So much so that we don't see the Hulk in that iteration ever again.
Yeah.
It's gone. Like, the same Hulk that ragdolled Loki, that punched Ultron essentially into the sun, got in the final fight in Asgard, and Thanos wastes him in minutes with no special powers whatsoever. Just raw strength. And the fact that he's also one of those villains that's always one of the most interesting villains, the villains that feel justified, and he's not 100% wrong. Like, and the fact that you combine his mind with his brawn, it's a fucking scary combination. And just the fact that he is so calculated in what he does. Like, you and I make a joke of it all the time. How many characters do you know, besides maybe John Doe that you just mentioned, can look their death in the face and be like, that's what's meant to happen. That means I won. If they had to do that, that means I won. He won to the point that time travel was the only recourse to fix it. Because they couldn't fix it in real time.
And a different means of time travel than they could have had because he destroyed the first one.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But he also falls under the category of his defeat comes by making it personal. Because when you take the first iteration of him in present day in Infinity War, he's so focused on his mission that he accomplishes it. He doesn't play around. He accomplishes his mission and does exactly what he set out to do. And honestly, if you look at Infinity War from an outside perspective, he, with what he's up against, he accomplishes it scarily easily.
Yeah.
Like, he makes it look like nothing. And then you get to Endgame, and they're on the ground at Avengers Facility. And he talks about how this time he's going to take joy in wiping out Earth. He took it to a personal level, and he got cocky, and he gloated, and it cost him.
And that's an interesting kind of take on when you look at just the idea of... Because at that point we're dealing with Guardians 1 Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the whole idea of... You would think as your life goes on, once you reach a certain point of adulthood, you're as smart as you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, as long as your mind is open to it, our minds are, like, constantly taking in new stuff and learning new stuff,
Mm-hmm.
to where we're always going to be different people than we were at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, it seems like there may not be a shitload of time between Guardians 1 Thanos and Infinity War Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
You get the vibe that, even though there's not really much time, you kind of more or less feel like the same person. When you really think about it, do you feel like a smarter person than you were just a year ago?
I would guess so, yeah.
And it's like to think that, like, you can see the differences
Mm-hmm.
between Infinity War Thanos and Guardians Thanos. Thanos,
Mm-hmm.
and how one is much more knows what to do.
Mm-hmm. And you also take the example too that by Endgame, he's blood hungry. He's angry because these people are undoing what he wanted his mission to be. In Infinity War, he was focused on his mission, but he still took time to feel things. He mourned Gamora's death. He tried to comfort Scarlet Witch after he had destroyed Vision, not once but twice. Um, well, actually, watched her do it and then rewound time so he could do it. He still tried to comfort her. There was feeling there. There was emotion. There was almost a sense that he almost felt bad. That he felt that he had to stoop to the means that he did to accomplish his goal. Whereas in Endgame, he becomes much more blood hungry. Like, I'm gonna enjoy destroying this little world that you've created. Fuck all of you. You broke my shit.
And what you were talking about with Scarlet Witch turns into, I don't even know who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And Scarlet Witch tries to... And if he didn't have his ship, Scarlet Witch would have ripped him apart from the inside out. Which I still contend, after watching WandaVision, Scarlet Witch now would have ripped him to fucking shreds, probably. But just a villain like that warrants that kind of response has to make the list. And it's totally warranted. Because do you realize that every Thanos after he fights Hulk, he never is in a one-on-one fight ever again. It is always multiple people coming at him at the same time, and he prevails every time, but the last time. And the last time, the only reason that he lost was because Tony Stark was willing to give his life, or he would have won again. And that would have been the end of it. He's an existential threat that showed no signs of being able to be beaten. When he gets his head chopped off at the beginning of Endgame, that only happens because he's already won, so he doesn't care, and he's so weak that he really couldn't put up a fight if he wanted to.
And it's the case where even though he was beaten not once but twice, what he accomplished is still, like, for however long this universe is going to go on, which seems like a very long time with a whole lot of plans coming up. Mm-hmm. What he accomplished is forever repercussions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he put fear in Loki. Like, Hulk did that, but not to the point where, like, Loki watched his own death. Spoilers. But to be that level of a threat and to warrant that kind of response, he has to make the list. He has to. Plus his justifiable means. I mean, he ticks just about every box on my scale. And even the charm box, like the way he explains it so sincerely that there was a whole movement of real people on this planet saying, maybe he's not wrong. When a fictional character can cross over and manipulate a real-life audience to think that way, that's impressive. Especially one that's a big purple CGI cartoon.
Who is not necessarily unfairly been compared to Grimace in this universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was also thinking about that scene when he's when you talk about like his charm, when he takes Gamora in and he's comforting her, and he's playing the father figure, while her planet's being slaughtered right behind them.
And he even takes the time that when Gamora points out she hates the chair, he doesn't sit in the chair.
Yeah.
So that's number 2 for me.
My number 2 is very simple because we've already been there.
Okay.
Before we even started rolling, I had said that there was somebody on mine that I can't believe is not on the AFI list. And that's this one. My number 2 is the T-1000.
Oh, we crossed over once.
Told you one time. Yeah, I don't know what else I can really add. I think we pretty much said everything about that.
I think so.
So I was trying to think if there was anything else I was going to add, but not really. Just knowing what he's capable of, but the impersonating, whether it be the the foster parents or Sarah. I forgot Sarah Connor's name for a split second.
Oh man.
Just for a second. And T2 is like one of the action movies you can go back to, like, just an endless number of times. And I think one of the main things that always brings me back, of all the amazing things that are in that movie, the thing that always brings me back is the T-1000 and what he's capable of, and the effects, and how unstoppable he is.
The effects still really hold up, too.
Yeah. All the scenes at the factory at the end when he's, like, blown apart and can somehow come back together in any form is insane, and I will just never get tired of that. So, yeah.
Number 1. Alright, don't close out of the video. Don't close out.
At number 1?
Number 1. Number 1 for me is Rupert Everett, Inspector Gadget, and I'll tell you why. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. Number 1 is Colonel Hans Landa of the SS.
Oh.
The dude is the only one, pretty much, he won World War II. He won World War II as a single entity. Landa's got it all. He's charming. He's manipulative. He is so goddamn smart. So smart. And he's one of the few that we've talked about tonight that doesn't have any psychotic tendencies. He has, that I can think of, other than when he's strangling Bridget von Hammerstein.
I was thinking of.
Other than that, but his psychotic tendencies do not cause him to be defeated.
What do you consider a psychotic tendency?
I think that he, like the beginning, when Shoshana's family's being slaughtered,
Yeah.
I think he does that as a job. That's what he's hired and paid to do. He explains that's his job. And I think it's interesting that later in the movie he, like, in the first part of it, he embraces that. Like, he's like, I'm the Jew hunter, it's what I do. And then in the end he's like, I fucking hate that name.
Was he saying he loves it to intimidate the farmer?
It could be. It could be. But to me, like, that part is just a job. Bridget von Hammersmark he takes personally because she lied to him. And she insulted his intelligence. I think that's where that rage comes from, is he feels like his intelligence was insulted.
I was going to say, because obviously it could be a betrayal thing, but at the same time, he's only on his own side, so...
He does not care. He does not care. And the scene where... And it's funny because it... For such a small man to be like one singular entity and to talk the way he does, where most of the time it's bubbly and conversational. The scene where he does kill Bridget von Hammersmark, it's very chilling. He just, like, he's the only guy that could straight up point at his leg, and it's like, oh fuck.
Yeah, because you clearly sense the tension through that whole scene. But with the way he's been all the way up to this point, and you can just tell, you can just imagine Tarantino relishing in this thought. The very last thing the audience is thinking is going to happen in that moment is him to lunge out of his seat and strangle her.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you think is going to happen.
And it's so funny because he beats you at every turn. Like, they go into the theater and they're like, we'll speak Italian. Germans, and Bridget von Hammersmark's like, well, Germans don't really have a good ear for Italian. No German people really know how to speak it. Hans Landa speaks it fucking perfectly. Like, because of course he fucking does. And his only drawback is that he relishes being the smartest guy in the room. He knows he is, and he loves it. But still, that doesn't even lead to his defeat. He gets out of this whole situation. Yes, he gets the swastika carved in his forehead, but he had the forethought ahead to pretty much make it to where Rain could not kill him. Yeah. That was not an option without fucking himself over. So yeah, he's got that swastika in his head, He goes to America, takes all that money they gave him, gets plastic surgery, and he's back on the street. Doing whatever he wants, retiring, doing whatever. I imagine he sits on a porch drinking wine, just hanging out, probably hitting on chicks at bars, like. And I just love that he's a character that's so easy to get drawn in. Like, it's easy to want to go on this journey with him, and there's so many times that him being the smartest guy in the room pays off, like in ways that you don't even realize till you look them up. An example of that is when they're in the diner, and he orders the strudel, and he gets the whipped cream. And when I first saw it, and he has her wait for the cream, I thought it was a play for control of the situation. Like, she's gonna wait to eat it because I told her to wait to eat it. But when you look it up, and you look into it, and you do some research on it, it's something about there's something in cream that Jews would not eat as part of their religion, and that's why he got the fucking cream and made her wait. He was feeling her out. I still, watching it back, I think he knew who she was, and he just chose not to do anything about it because he could. I think the fact that he put the fear of death in her was enough for him. But yeah, I mean, what else can you say? I mean, he ticks all the boxes. His threat level is not as high as Thanos, because Thanos broke the system. But he's still a very big threat, not physically, but with his mind. Because he could, in a battle of wits, like, he's what Wallace Shawn in The Princess Bride wishes he could be. Like, Landa is so smart. Landa gets out of that alive. And Carrie Elwes dies.
Wallace Shawn dies.
No, in the scenario where it's
okay.
Landa across the table from him, Carrie Elwes dies.
Okay.
Whether he lunges across the table and just strangles him, it's hard to tell. But Tarantino's written a lot of interesting characters. It's like his forte. Landa, to me, is the most interesting because of just what he's able to accomplish and how he is able to get out of a situation where he shouldn't be able to win, but he does. And even his comeuppance isn't that satisfying because he'll just walk it off.
Talking about Tarantino villains, when you say this stuff about Wanda, do you see bits of Wanda in Steven?
Yeah. Except Steven wasn't smart enough to get out alive.
He's probably one of the smartest people in the movie, for sure.
Yeah, with manipulation. For sure.
I didn't pick a Tarantino villain, weirdly enough. If I did, I probably would have gone with Steven, but...
There's a pretty good library there. I toyed with putting Calvin Candy on the list for a while. Steven's good. Bill is good.
Short-lived as he is, you could have said Zed, too.
Yeah.
Or Dell as a legend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You could do Joe Cabot. You could pretty much pull anyone.
I think the villain of Reservoir Dogs is Mr. Blonde.
It's a good choice. It's a good choice. Hell, even Tex from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood crossed my mind. Stuntman Mike would have made my top 20. I wanted to include Stuntman Mike, but I couldn't justify him over the rest. I just couldn't do it. But to me, it's Landa. He's got the mind, he's got the charm, he's the total package in a villain, and he wins. And any villain that wins is going to be high on the list because by design the villain typically loses. Notice my top 2 succeeded. Thanos ultimately loses, but he wins first. So that concludes my list.
Three of mine survive, but 2 of them are going to prison. and 1 is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my number 1.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably I could do a lot of build up, but if you've seen any of these videos, when you hear it, you're gonna say, "Oh, I'm not surprised." When you hear it, you're gonna say, "Oh, I'm not surprised."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I knew even before we started this. I knew what my number 1 was. I'm always going to know
Mm-hmm.
who was in this spot. And I'm sure years and years and years from now, this person will still be in this spot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no question. Do you know? The Wicked Witch of the West.
Ah.
Yeah. Sorry if that's anticlimactic or predictable or something, but, I mean, when you talk about icons,
Mm-hmm.
especially iconic villains, I mean, I don't even really know what else I can go into with this. But the very first verses I ever did was The Wizard of Oz. It was my number 2 when we did our top movies of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've talked about it at great length. Yeah, we have Mila Kunis in Raimi's movie and stuff like that, and she has a whole musical devoted to her and all that. I'm pretty much specifically talking about Margaret Hamilton. I'm pretty sure that's known. I love the idea. You could say this about, Scar and stuff like that. But you look at these movies, especially these days, these movies that seem to be aimed at children mainly, always have to have, like, the well-rounded villains.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, oh, you can see where this villain is coming from and stuff like that. Or, oh, this villain has this side to them. But ultimately evil prevails with them or whatever. Then sometimes there's... Her name is the Wicked Witch of the West. There's no... This is all pure villainy. Like, there's no other side. I mean, yeah, when you watch Raimi's movie, and I'm not completely up on the Wizard of Oz lore in general, what all, L. Frank Baum had going on with these characters. But I'm just looking specifically at Margaret Hamilton's portrayal, and there is no good in this character. It is all evil. It is all wicked. That's the kind of... I mean, I get the well-rounded characters thing, and like a Thanos, where you can say, oh, I can see where they're coming from, and oh, they have these actual emotions in them and stuff like that. I love that. I love a well-rounded character, but more often than not, at the end of the day, I just love a completely irredeemable villain that is just evil through and through and nothing else. And that's pretty much this character personified, isn't it? I mean, what is this Margaret Hamilton incarnation of the Wicked Witch of the West do that is not part of the wanting to kill this child Dorothy to take the ruby slippers from her? Yeah, you can say she has a motive because her sister, but they were evil. So yeah. And like I said, when you think of iconic villains, I mean, how many... You've been in my bedroom. How many, like, items that have the image of the Wicked Witch of the West on them do I own?
Quite a few.
It's like, yeah, it's just everything I look for. And like I said, we were talking before, where we've picked before, I've mentioned before, picking a favorite performance in each category: leading actor, actress, supporting actor, actress.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking the supporting actress area, like that categorization, my favorite performance of all time would be Margaret Hamilton in The Wizard of Oz. And yeah, and I will add one more thing, unrelated to the Wicked Witch, but related to the Wizard of Oz, that I didn't mention when we did our top 15 video, that answers a question that I had, that I kind of figured out weirdly recently, which was, I was saying that it's clearly a musical, but something about it, like, it occurs to me late that it's because the songs are so ingrained in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when somebody says, what's your favorite musical, it's clearly The Wizard of Oz, but for some reason, when I hear the word musical, I don't think about The Wizard of Oz for some reason. And what I realized watching it again recently was that if you don't count the Winky Guard chant, which some people do, If I Were King of the Forest is the last song in it. And there's still like a third of the movie left after that. The entire last third of the movie, like not the third act, but the entire last third fraction of the movie is not a musical. And it's like, there's not many musicals you can say that about.
No.
But it is definitely a musical. So, yeah.
Just for the record, I do count the Wiki Guard chant, because that chant fucking slaps.
That is not the first time I've heard that. So, is that it?
I think so.
All right. So, there's some people I wrote down that I didn't say that I feel like I should bring up now because I know people were probably thinking, where the hell are they? One of those might be Anton Chigurh. Certainly.
I was surprised he didn't pop up.
Yeah. Some other people. This was a case where I wasn't. These weren't really in like an order or people that I like heavily considered. I just like wrote down villains that came to mind, and then I was going to try to work it out. Charles Boyer and Gaslight. The origin of gaslighting. I mean, this should have been a candidate. Francis Dollarhide. Manhunter.
Oh, so you're looking at the Manhunter version.
Yeah, you could throw Fiennes in there, but I think Tom Noonan first when I think Dollarhide, don't you?
Yeah.
Pennywise, Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise, because, you know, TV series versus actual movie. We're doing movie villains. I know, Tim Curry's the greatest. I'm not saying otherwise. David from the Lost Boys, Immortan Joe, John Lithgow in Blowout came to mind. Lots of Hug and Bear came to mind. This was before we lost Ned Beatty this past week. Harlan Maguire, Jude Law in Road to Perdition. Alec Baldwin in Miami Blues came to mind. So many Bond villains. Raul Silva, Red Grant, Trevelyan. We've got a whole Bond video where we go into that. Somebody I really considered, Yellow Bastard.
Yeah.
And or Kevin. If you want to stick to the movie. Ray Sinclair, Ray Liotta in Something Wild. Castor Troy. And Beetlejuice.
Some good stuff there.
I thought it was very weird. When I came out of this, I was like, I have no slashers, I have no Stephen King villains, I have no comic book villains, and I have no Bond villains. Which was insane to me. I never planned on that.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't a whole I want to be different kind of thing. That just is what happened. So yeah, if I had to pick a Bond villain, I would have gone Silva or Red Grant.
Some of the others that I considered, Beetlejuice was on that list. Purely for a camp standpoint, like I said, favorite, not top, but purely from a camp standpoint, I toyed with the idea of Vic Deakins from Broken Arrow. Just because it's so over the top, it's ludicrous.
While we're on John Woo, I mentioned him, but still, like, the more I'm thinking about it now, the more I'm surprised neither one of us said Castor Troy.
Yeah, thought about Castor Troy. Loki came to mind for a minute, and then I ultimately went with Thanos. Who else did I think about including? Voldemort was an option at one point.
Why did I not even think of it?
I don't know. I actually had a lot of Fiennes going on, because I also thought of Fiennes in Schindler's List, and I really, really, really wanted to, but I just could not do it. I really toyed with the idea of Fiennes in Bruges. I really toyed with that idea. I really wanted to do it, because Fiennes is great. The fact that Fiennes has done so many great villains and he didn't include, he's not on any of our lists. That's just unfortunate, because Fiennes is fantastic.
I love the Harry Potters, don't get me wrong, but I would have said Harry Waters long before I said Voldemort, as far as Fiennes goes.
Yeah. Would you have said Harry Waters before His character in Schindler's List.
Probably, I don't. It's hard to because his character in Schindler's List is one of those things that just kind of feels like it should be objective.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's really hard to rank like a real person. That was the problem I had with Tex.
yeah, yeah.
Because it feels like you don't want to glorify a real piece of shit. Like it's different to praise a performance, but to praise him like as a character would have just felt weird with a like a real person. What are you looking
I'm
for?
looking for real people. I don't have any.
I don't either.
I mean, I have realistic people like Hans Beckert and Doyle Hargraves, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my most realistic is probably Carter Hayes.
yeah.
But yeah, so there was a lot to pick from. I toyed with Frankenfurter for a while from Rocky Horror, but I just couldn't justify it because he didn't do anything like inherently evil besides put Jonathan Adams in fishnets. I mean, I guess he whacked Meatloaf, but
It feels weird that Tim Curry's like not here.
mm-hmm.
But I mean, like, which one would we choose?
Mm-hmm.
If his Pennywise, we would kind of put in the TV department.
I'm sorry, one of my favorite Tim Curry performances is Home Alone 2. I can't help it. I love Tim Curry in Home Alone 2 because he's so like he's like Ed Rooney. Like his means are terrible, but I mean he is dealing with what he thinks is a stolen credit card. Like he even brings up that he'll contact the authorities.
And I do feel like there is one that I kind of like regret,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like that person should be here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like like I don't know why I didn't go the slasher route,
Mm-hmm.
because clearly Michael Myers probably should be here.
Yeah. There was a couple others that came to mind for me. I thought about the Predator, Xenomorph, Ivan Drago came to mind.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, Ivan Drago was in consideration for a little bit.
So one that caught my attention late was I saw your Jack Skellington over there, and it reminded me of Oogie Boogie. Would have been a choice.
Yeah, Boogie Boogie would have been one.
Oh, another one that came to mind really late was Commodus. Right.
Yeah. I thought about Carl from Fargo.
Yeah. I thought about Gayer from Fargo, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would it have would we have just put them as a pair, or because
Maybe.
remember AFI did Bonnie and Clyde together?
Yeah, maybe. This definitely would have been an honorable mention, but I can't ignore, and maybe it's partly the performance more so than the character. It was really hard for me to ignore Casanova Frankenstein.
That would have been a good one.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about. We need to sit down sometime and write the Mystery Men sequel because I've had new ideas about it. We should do a whole video on our Mystery Men sequel.
Speaking of Casanova Frankenstein, I would have put money on you having Barbosa.
Thought about it.
From specifically the Black Pearl.
Mm-hmm. I thought about it. Actually, my favorite Pirates villain, honestly, I know the movie's not great. I love Bardem in Dead Men Tell No Tales.
Really? I totally thought you were about to say Davy Jones. And that was
No.
That's like when you were building up Thanos,
Mm-hmm.
and you said we got to see him die twice.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were going Trevelyan,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had my thoughts set on a Bond villain, and so as you kept going, I thought you were going to say Silva. So you kind of caught me off guard when you said Thanos.
I even brought up 24 films.
Yes. Yeah, that's what.
Although Trevelyan didn't warrant all that, but
Yeah.
I mean, he warranted Bond, who's in 24 films, but. So yeah, there were a lot of options we could have gone with, but obviously the ones that made our list for a reason, even if they seem silly like Ed Rooney. But yeah, so I think that pretty much covers it.
Alright, so there's a couple more videos I'm trying to convince you to do while we're in the same space, but we'll see what becomes of those, and we'll see what our next big one is. I don't know if you want to go down the comedy route like we were going to do or what, but
I'm not sure.
we'll figure something out, because we've done horror movies,
Mm-hmm.
we've done our favorite movies, and now we've done this.
Mm-hmm.
We did actors. So I tried to get you to do directors, but you seemed to... You weren't sure.
Yeah.
But we'll figure out whatever we're doing.
We'll get there.
And hopefully it's as fun as this one is.
Yeah.
Alright, so until the next thing, is that it?
That's it.